In the heart of Nazi-occupied Poland, a plan was set in motion unlike anything the world had ever seen before. It was not a battle, not an invasion, but a silent, calculated machine designed for one purpose only: the systematic annihilation of millions of men, women, and children. This plan had a name whispered in darkness: Operation Reinhard. Behind barbed wire, hidden in forests, and concealed by lies, the deadliest phase of the Holocaust unfolded with terrifying speed. Trains rolled endlessly toward camps built not for prisoners, but for death. Within just a few months, entire communities vanished, erased from the earth as if they had never existed. What was Operation Reinhard? Who designed it, who carried it out, and why was it so devastatingly effective? Tonight, we step into the shadows of history to uncover the machinery of one of the darkest operations humanity has ever known. If you enjoyed this story, please hit like. It really helps share these incredible moments of history. And if it wasn't your favorite, hit dislike. Your feedback helps me make better content just for you. Every click counts, and I truly appreciate your support. Now let's begin with the chapters. Chapter 1. Shadows over Poland. The prelude to Operation Reinhard. In the autumn of 1939, the world tilted into chaos. When German troops marched across the Polish frontier on September 1st, the opening act of World War II began. Poland, positioned between Nazi Germany to the west and the Soviet Union to the east, found itself crushed in a matter of weeks. The speed of conquest was shocking, but the consequences of this invasion were even more devastating. For Poland's Jewish population, the largest in Europe, numbering more than 3 million people, this was the beginning of a nightmare that would soon transform into one of the most systematic genocides in human history. Operation Reinhard, the plan that would eventually bring about the murder of nearly all of Poland's Jews, did not spring into existence overnight. Its roots stretched back through years of anti-Semitic ideology, bureaucratic planning, and the radicalization of Nazi racial policy. Yet, to fully understand why this operation unfolded in Poland, one must first look at the unique role that the country played in both the German imagination and in their territorial ambitions. Poland was more than just conquered land. It was a laboratory of terror. When the Nazis annexed the western parts of Poland and carved out the so-called general government in the center, they created a vast administrative zone where millions of Jews were trapped. The Nazis viewed this region as a dumping ground, a place where undesirable populations could be isolated, controlled, and eventually eliminated. Ghettos sprouted across the landscape, walled-off districts in cities like Warsaw, Lublin, and Krakow, where hunger, disease, and overcrowding slowly strangled life. In those first years of occupation, Nazi policy was not yet fixed on complete annihilation. Instead, officials toyed with different ideas: mass deportation beyond Europe, forced resettlement in inhospitable regions, and brutal labor exploitation. One early scheme, called the Madagascar Plan, imagined shipping millions of Jews to the island off Africa's coast, where isolation and harsh conditions would eventually kill them. But as the war widened and Britain controlled the seas, such fantasies collapsed. What remained was a question at the heart of Nazi ideology. If Jews could not be expelled, how else could the so-called Jewish question be solved? The answer grew darker with each passing month. By 1940 and 1941, mass shootings by the Einsatzgruppen in the Soviet Union showed the German leadership that extermination could be carried out directly. Yet these shootings, though vast in scale, were considered inefficient, demoralizing for the troops, and too visible to outside eyes. What Himmler and his lieutenants wanted was a method that was faster, more concealed, and less psychologically burdensome for the perpetrators. It was in Poland, already filled with ghettos, already marked by Nazi cruelty, that this machinery of murder would take its most lethal form. For the Jewish communities living in Poland, the early years of occupation carried signs of catastrophe, but few could yet imagine the scale of what was coming. Traditional life collapsed. Businesses were confiscated, synagogues desecrated, and schools shut down. Families who had once lived alongside Christian neighbors found themselves corralled into overcrowded ghettos where starvation was used as policy. The Nazis distributed food rations according to racial hierarchy. Germans at the top with generous supplies, Poles given barely enough to survive, and Jews receiving the smallest portion of all, so little that survival without smuggling was nearly impossible. Despite the cruelty, life inside the ghettos did not completely extinguish. People organized secret schools, underground newspapers, and cultural activities to preserve a sense of dignity. Children played in courtyards even as malnutrition weakened them. Doctors struggled to provide care with dwindling supplies. Religious leaders held prayer services, often in secret, to keep faith alive. These fragile sparks of humanity continued even as German policies closed in, tightening the noose month by month. By late 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union had shifted Nazi thinking toward total extermination. The death toll from mass shootings was already in the hundreds of thousands. Yet the Nazi leadership wanted a more systematic solution, one that could be replicated with chilling precision. That is when Poland, with its isolated rail lines, its vast forests, and its already segregated Jewish population, was chosen as the testing ground for what would become Operation Reinhard. The name itself carried an ominous weight. It was dedicated to Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most ruthless figures in the Nazi hierarchy, who had been assassinated by Czech resistance fighters in June 1942. Heydrich had been instrumental in laying the groundwork for the final solution, and naming the operation after him was both a tribute and a continuation of his deadly vision. Under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler and Odilo Globocnik, the SS officer appointed as overseer, this operation would soon give birth to a network of extermination camps whose efficiency in killing would eclipse anything the world had ever known. But before Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka began their grim work, Poland itself became a crucible where despair and false hope intermingled. The ghettos still functioned, though barely. Deportations had not yet reached their full fury, but rumors swirled of mass graves and disappearing transports. People whispered about distant forests where shooting pits swallowed entire communities. Some clung to the belief that deportation meant resettlement or labor camps. Others suspected, dimly but correctly, that the Nazis intended something far worse. As 1942 approached, the machinery of genocide was ready to shift into its most lethal phase. The stage was set, the ghettos were full, and the Nazi leadership had resolved that annihilation. Not deportation, not forced labor, not expulsion would be the final answer. The shadows lengthened over Poland, and within them, Operation Reinhard was about to begin. The history of Operation Reinhard cannot be understood without lingering on the atmosphere of Poland in those early years of the occupation, for it was in that atmosphere that despair was carefully manufactured, and possibilities for resistance deliberately narrowed. After the initial conquest, the Nazis implemented a policy of brutal fragmentation, dividing Polish society into categories of value and non-value. Germans stood at the top, Poles were subjugated, and Jews were marked for eventual disappearance. This system created a world where daily survival was not only uncertain but was also manipulated as a weapon. Food became a tool of oppression, movement was tightly restricted, and the very rhythms of life were determined by occupation authorities. The ghettos were at the heart of this system. Warsaw's ghetto, the largest of them all, became a city within a city, sealed by walls and barbed wire, cut off from the outside world. With over 400,000 people forced into an area of just a few square kilometers, Overcrowding reached unimaginable levels. Streets once filled with bustling shops now echoed with the sounds of carts carrying the dead, victims of starvation and typhus that swept unchecked through the population. Children became smugglers, slipping through cracks in walls or tunnels beneath them to bring back bread, potatoes, or scraps of food from the outside. The penalty for being caught was death, yet families relied on this fragile lifeline. In smaller ghettos across towns like Lublin, Radom, and Białystok, conditions mirrored this cruelty. Jewish councils, or Judenrat, were forced into existence by the Germans, compelled to administer Nazi orders under impossible circumstances. These councils had to organize food distribution, sanitation, and labor while simultaneously delivering lists of individuals for forced labor or deportation. The councils hoped that by cooperating, they might buy time for their communities, yet in reality, they were trapped in a system designed to collapse. Amid these bleak realities, the Nazis tested methods of exploitation and destruction. In 1940, entire populations were deported from some ghettos to labor camps, where work in quarries, factories, and construction projects drained bodies until they were broken. Survival meant producing labor value, but only temporarily, as the system was not designed to sustain Jewish lives indefinitely. This labor exploitation became a prelude to the larger and more permanent solution of extermination. The turning point came with the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. Operation Barbarossa unleashed a new level of racial war, and behind the advancing army's mobile killing units, the Einsatzgruppen, left a trail of mass graves. Villages and towns in Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states became killing fields where tens of thousands were executed in broad daylight. Though these massacres occurred outside of Poland, their significance rippled across the occupied territories. The Nazi leadership saw in these actions a model, though one still too messy, too visible, and too demanding for their long-term goals. They sought refinement, and that refinement would emerge in Poland. What made Poland particularly suited to this next stage was not only geography but also perception. In Nazi eyes, Poland was a land without value except as a colony to be ruled and exploited. Its Jewish population was vast and already segregated, and its people had been demonized for centuries in anti-Semitic propaganda. The Germans saw the country as a place where the rules of civilization could be suspended, where unspeakable actions could be carried out away from the scrutiny of Western Europe. Rail lines crisscrossed the territory, providing the infrastructure needed to move populations swiftly, and isolated forest clearings offered concealment for what was to come. The Polish Jewish community, meanwhile, continued to cling to fragments of hope. Rumors and fragmentary reports from the East hinted at mass killings, but these were hard to believe in their full scale. People reasoned that the Germans needed workers and that deportations must mean labor camps. In the ghettos, families whispered about destinations but could not agree whether deportation meant survival or death. German propaganda deliberately fed this uncertainty, spreading lies about resettlement in new lands where food and work awaited. This deception was crucial, for the Nazis understood that large-scale cooperation from their victims would make the logistics of annihilation far easier. By late 1941, the decision was firm. The final solution, as it would be called, was to move beyond persecution and enter the stage of industrial murder. The killing centers Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka were not conceived as prisons or labor sites. They were designed with a single function: to murder as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time. The plans were made in secrecy, yet the machinery of destruction was already humming to life as construction began. For Jews still inside the ghettos, the shadow of this decision was invisible but close. Communities continued to organize cultural activities, staging theater performances, secret classes, and even concerts, trying to preserve identity in the face of erasure. These acts of resistance, though small, carried deep significance. They reminded people of who they were and what they stood to lose. The contrast between this fragile insistence on life and the silent preparations for mass death is one of the most haunting aspects of the history of Operation Reinhard, as 1942 dawned. The storm was ready to break. Reinhard Heydrich had been assassinated in Prague, and in his name the operation of extermination was christened. Himmler placed Odilo Globocnik, the SS and police leader of Lublin, in charge of the project. Globocnik, ruthless and ambitious, was already notorious for his role in terrorizing populations, and under his supervision the extermination camps would soon begin to function with deadly precision. For now, the ghettos still existed, but they were ticking clocks. Each brick wall and each guarded gate enclosed a population already marked for death, even if most could not yet imagine it. Operation Reinhard was not yet launched in its full scale, but its outlines were clear. The ghettos were reservoirs of human lives waiting to be drained. The SS had chosen its commanders, drawn up blueprints for the camps, and prepared the bureaucratic orders. Poland, trapped between despair and illusion, was about to witness the darkest chapter of its long history. The prelude was ending, and the machinery of annihilation was about to roar into motion. Chapter 2: The Birth of a Genocidal Blueprint. Nazi ideology and policy before 1942. The genocide that came to be known as Operation Reinhard was not the product of a single meeting, nor the invention of one man. It was the culmination of years of poisonous ideas, bureaucratic planning, and the radicalization of Nazi ideology into policy. To understand how millions of Jews in Poland came to be marked for annihilation in 1942, one must look back at the development of Nazi thought and how it hardened into a genocidal blueprint long before the first death camp opened its gates. At the heart of it was ideology. An ideology steeped in anti-Semitism, racial hierarchy, and visions of a new order for Europe. Adolf Hitler, from the earliest pages of his book Mein Kampf, had cast Jews as the eternal enemy. To him, Jews were not just individuals of a particular faith or ethnicity, but a force he described as corrupting nations, orchestrating revolutions, and undermining civilization itself. These conspiratorial notions were not new. Anti-Semitism had deep roots in Europe. But under Hitler and the Nazi movement, they became the central organizing principle of state policy. The fate of Europe, as the Nazis imagined it, depended on eliminating Jews completely. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, they wasted no time in translating words into action. Jews were stripped of civil rights, barred from professions, and subjected to public humiliation. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 formalized this persecution, defining Jews not by faith but by ancestry, reducing them to racial outsiders in their own homeland. This was only the beginning. Behind every speech, every policy, and every new law, there was a growing obsession: how to deal with what the regime called the Jewish question. Initially, expulsion seemed to the Nazis the most practical solution. Forcing Jews out of Germany and Austria became policy in the late 1930s. Tens of thousands fled, though often stripped of property and wealth, and many more were trapped by the tightening immigration restrictions in the rest of the world. Yet as war approached, the feasibility of mass expulsion shrank. Hitler's ambitions were not limited to Germany. He wanted an empire stretching across Europe, a racial empire where Jews had no place. The question grew sharper. If they could not simply be pushed out, what should be done with them? The invasion of Poland in 1939 created new possibilities and new dilemmas for the Nazi leadership. Suddenly, they ruled over the largest Jewish population in Europe, millions of men, women, and children whose very existence challenged the Nazi vision of racial purity. The ghettos, created under the supervision of officials like Hans Frank in the general government, were temporary holding pens, meant to concentrate Jews and isolate them from the broader population. But even as they were established, Nazi leaders debated what the next step should be. One of the earliest schemes was the so-called Madagascar Plan. This idea, first proposed in 1940, imagined transporting the Jews of Europe to the island of Madagascar, then a French colony. There, under harsh conditions and German control, Jews would supposedly die off naturally. The plan revealed both the fantasy-like thinking of Nazi officials and their determination to remove Jews from Europe entirely. It was never implemented. Britain's control of the seas made it impossible, but the proposal highlighted the radical direction of Nazi thought. As the war expanded, so too did the scope of Nazi policy. The conquest of France, the Low Countries, and the Balkans brought millions more Jews under German influence. By 1941, with preparations underway for the invasion of the Soviet Union, the leadership began to consider more drastic solutions. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, did more than open a new front. It opened a new phase of genocide. As German armies pushed eastward, the Einsatzgruppen followed, carrying out mass shootings that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Entire communities were wiped out, executed in fields and forests, their bodies dumped into hastily dug pits. These massacres demonstrated both the determination of the Nazis to destroy Jewish life and the limitations of their current methods. Shooting people one by one, even in mass formations, consumed time, ammunition, and human endurance. Reports circulated of soldiers breaking down from the psychological strain, even though many carried out the killings without hesitation. Leaders like Heinrich Himmler sought a solution that was both more efficient and more concealed. They wanted murder to be industrialized, streamlined, and divorced from the emotional burden of direct killing. The blueprint of extermination was taking shape. Ghettos had concentrated Jewish populations, making them easier to target. Deportations by rail could move people quickly from cities and villages to remote locations. What remained was to design facilities that could transform arrival into death with chilling speed. Experiments had already begun. Gas vans, in which victims were suffocated by carbon monoxide, were tested in the killing of disabled people under the so-called euthanasia program known as T4. This program, carried out between 1939 and 1941, targeted Germans with mental and physical disabilities, whom the Nazis considered life unworthy of life. Though the program faced public protests and was officially halted, its techniques and personnel would later be transferred directly into Operation Reinhard. Thus, by late 1941, the pieces of the genocidal puzzle were already in place. Ideology had defined Jews as a race to be exterminated. Bureaucracy had created systems for cataloging, registering, and controlling them. Ghettos had corralled populations into confined areas, and killing experiments had tested methods of mass murder. What was needed was a decisive step, a centralized operation that would turn scattered policies into a coordinated plan of annihilation. That step was Operation Reinhard, which would begin in 1942, using all the lessons learned from years of persecution and radicalization. But even as Nazi leaders drew their blueprints for extermination, Jewish families across Europe still tried to interpret their future through the lens of survival. They debated whether deportation might mean labor, whether rumors of mass killings were exaggerated, whether endurance might bring eventual liberation. The gap between what people hoped and what the Nazi leadership planned was vast. And in that gap lay the greatest tragedy. While ordinary men, women, and children clung to fragile hope, the Nazi state was finalizing the most lethal plan Europe had ever seen. The Nazi vision of a racially cleansed Europe was not improvised in 1942. It was built layer by layer, a chilling staircase of policies and experiments leading steadily toward mass extermination. To understand why Operation Reinhard became possible, one must look carefully at these steps, each one small enough to be seen by contemporaries as merely harsh or temporary, yet together forming the path to genocide. By the time the first ghettos were established in Poland in 1940, the Nazi state already had years of practice in dehumanization. German propaganda had painted Jews as carriers of disease, parasites feeding off society, and conspirators behind communism and capitalism alike. These images were broadcast through posters, films, newspapers, and speeches, saturating public imagination until hatred felt like common sense. The ghettos seemed, at first glance, to fit this logic. If Jews were supposedly dangerous, separating them from the rest of the population was presented as a matter of hygiene and order. To ordinary Germans, and even to some Poles under occupation, it appeared as another measure of wartime control. But hidden within this step was a far deadlier purpose. Concentration was not the end. It was the beginning of destruction. The ghettos created the infrastructure of genocide before the word itself was ever used. By forcing Jews into confined districts, the Nazis eliminated freedom of movement and created lists, records, and administrative bodies that could later be used to coordinate deportations. Jewish councils were ordered to keep meticulous rolls of every man, woman, and child, names that would later become train manifests to death camps. The ghettos, starving and diseased as they were, functioned as holding pens, awaiting a decision from above about what final fate was intended. Meanwhile, the Nazi leadership grew bolder. The invasion of the Soviet Union radicalized policy further than ever before. The Einsatzgruppen massacres were not simply spontaneous outbursts of violence. They were systematic, ordered from above, and intended as laboratories for what was to come. The reports sent back to Berlin, tallying thousands of murders in single operations, became data points in a grim calculation. How fast, how efficient, how thorough could mass killing be made? Each pit of corpses dug into the earth of Ukraine or Belarus was, in the Nazi mind, a rehearsal. But shooting had its limits, and the Nazis knew it. Even hardened SS men found themselves shaken after days of face-to-face killing. In one documented case, Himmler himself attended a shooting in Minsk in 1941 and watched as hundreds were executed. Witnesses recalled that he turned pale and appeared shaken, though he never abandoned the policy. What he took from the experience was the need for a method that would remove the psychological burden from the killers while still achieving extermination on a vast scale. This need dovetailed with another Nazi program, the so-called T for Euthanasia campaign. Beginning in 1939, doctors, nurses, and administrators had overseen the killing of tens of thousands of disabled Germans through gas chambers disguised as showers. Carbon monoxide was piped into sealed rooms, while bureaucrats kept records and crematoria disposed of the bodies. The protests of families and church officials eventually forced Hitler to publicly halt the program in 1941. But the knowledge it produced did not vanish. Instead, the personnel, engineers, medical staff, administrators were quietly transferred eastward, bringing with them the technology and experience that would be repurposed in Operation Reinhard. Thus, by late 1941, the genocidal blueprint was already drawn. Jews had been stripped of rights, concentrated in ghettos, experimented upon through starvation and forced labor, and massacred in the East. A method for mass killing without bullets had been developed and tested. What remained was to combine all these elements into a single, coordinated program. That coordination required leadership, secrecy, and infrastructure, and all three would soon be provided. In January 1942, The infamous Wannsee Conference brought together senior Nazi officials to discuss and streamline the final solution. Chaired by Reinhard Heydrich, the meeting did not invent the idea of extermination. Rather, it confirmed and coordinated what was already happening. Around a polished table in a villa outside Berlin, men in suits and uniforms calmly discussed logistics. How many Jews lived in each European country, how they would be deported, and who would oversee the process. It was not a debate over morality. It was a meeting to ensure efficiency. The figures were chilling: millions of lives reduced to numbers, to be solved like an administrative problem. The blueprints drawn from ideology and tested through massacre were now entering their operational phase. Poland, with its railways, ghettos, and isolated forests, would become the focal point. Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka were not conceived as labor camps or prisons. They were conceived as factories of death. Their design modeled in part on the T4 installations but scaled for far greater throughput. Deportations would be disguised as resettlement, trains would carry the victims under guard, and upon arrival the killing would begin almost immediately. It is important to note that at this point, in early 1942, many of the Jews trapped in ghettos still did not know what awaited them. The Nazis cloaked their intentions in secrecy and deception. Official orders spoke of evacuations and relocations. Rumors of shootings in the East circulated, but the very scale of what was being planned seemed unbelievable. How could anyone imagine that entire communities would be erased in a matter of weeks, that whole trains would disappear into forests and never return? Hope clung stubbornly to people's minds, even as starvation, forced labor, and deportations eroded daily life. The genocidal blueprint was now complete. It had traveled a long road, from Hitler's rantings in Mein Kampf, to discriminatory laws, to ghettos, to massacres, to gas experiments, to bureaucratic conferences. Each stage laid the groundwork for the next, normalizing cruelty, hardening hearts, and erasing resistance. When Operation Reinhard was launched in the spring of 1942, it was not an improvisation but the inevitable conclusion of years of deliberate planning. The ideology had matured into policy, and policy was about to become mechanized murder on a scale the world had never seen. Chapter 3: Architects of Annihilation. Himmler, Globocnik, and the Reinhard staff, every vast enterprise of history, whether creative or destructive, has its architects, the men who sketch its outlines, direct its machinery, and ensure its execution. Operation Reinhard, though remembered today as a shadow of horror, was not a chaotic wave of violence but a meticulously organized project. Its architects were not anonymous bureaucrats lost in the machinery of war, but identifiable individuals, each carrying a vision, each wielding power, and each responsible for shaping one of the deadliest operations in human history. At the top stood Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer of the SS. Himmler was no soldier in the traditional sense. He lacked the battlefield charisma of generals or the flamboyance of party leaders. Instead, he was a bureaucrat of death, a man who combined obsessive ideology with a chilling eye for detail. To Himmler, the extermination of Jews was not only a racial necessity but also a sacred duty, wrapped in the pseudoscientific nonsense of Nazi racial theory. His role was to provide the authority, the resources, and the ruthless drive to see Operation Reinhard through. He signed the orders, visited the sites, and demanded results. In his vision, Poland was to be transformed into a testing ground for the new racial empire, cleared of Jews and ready for German colonists. Yet Himmler did not act alone. He needed men who could translate his ideology into practical steps, who could take abstract hatred and turn it into logistical reality. This is where Odilo Globocnik entered the picture. Globocnik, an Austrian and fervent Nazi, had risen through the ranks with a reputation for brutality and ambition. In 1939, he was appointed SS and police leader in Lublin, a region at the heart of the general government. This position gave him sweeping control over security forces, police, and administrative structures. It was Globocnik who would be tasked with overseeing Operation Reinhard, and under his authority the extermination camps of Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka would come into being. Globocnik was a man both feared and distrusted, even among his fellow Nazis. Known for corruption and ruthlessness, he was nevertheless effective in pursuing the tasks handed down to him. For Operation Reinhard, he became the central organizer, drawing together resources, personnel, and sites to carry out the extermination. His headquarters in Lublin became the nerve center of the operation, where orders were given, timetables arranged, and statistics compiled. If Himmler was the high priest of ideology, Globocnik was its engineer, ensuring that vision was transformed into action on the ground. But an operation of this magnitude required more than two men. Around Globocnik gathered a team of specialists whose names would forever be tied to the machinery of death. Among them was Christian Wirth, a man whose career traced a direct line from the euthanasia program to the death camps of Poland. Wirth had overseen gas chamber operations under the T4 program, and his experience in killing with carbon monoxide made him invaluable to Operation Reinhard. He was appointed as inspector of the extermination camps, charged with supervising their construction and ensuring their efficiency. Known as a harsh disciplinarian and an unflinching killer, Wirth became one of the most feared figures among both staff and prisoners. Supporting him were other veterans of the euthanasia program, men like Franz Stangl, later commandant of Sobibor and Treblinka, and Irmfried Eberl, briefly commandant of Treblinka. These men brought with them not only technical expertise but also a hardened detachment, having already overseen the deaths of thousands of disabled people in Germany. Their transition into killing on an even larger scale was shockingly seamless. What had once been called mercy deaths within the borders of the Reich now became industrial slaughter in the forests of occupied Poland. The Reinhard staff also included mid-level SS officers, guards, and administrators drawn from across the Nazi Empire. Some came from police units, others from concentration camps, and still others from the army. Many were Austrians, reflecting the strong support for Nazism in that region. These men, often in their 20s and 30s, found themselves part of an operation that demanded not only obedience but also initiative and cruelty. They designed timetables for trains, supervised construction crews, and created routines for mass killing that became horrifyingly efficient. Himmler's vision, Globocnik's authority, and Wirth's expertise created a deadly trinity. Each man embodied a different aspect of the operation: ideological justification, administrative control, and technical know-how. Together, they turned the Nazi obsession with extermination into a functioning reality. What makes their story particularly chilling is not only their brutality but their bureaucratic precision. Orders were drafted with clinical language. Reports tallied the number of victims as if counting shipments of goods, and inspections focused on whether processing was swift enough. The language stripped away humanity, allowing men to believe they were performing a duty rather than committing mass murder. Yet behind every decision lay human consequences on an unimaginable scale. When Himmler demanded speed, it meant trains of families arriving at camps without pause. When Globocnik pressed for efficiency, it meant gas chambers running at full capacity. When Wirth insisted on discipline, it meant that guards would shoot anyone who faltered, whether prisoner or staff. The cold administrative framework concealed a furnace of cruelty, and it was the architects themselves who ensured it burned without interruption. Operation Reinhard did not require millions of perpetrators. Instead, it required a relatively small circle of committed men at the top, supported by a network of functionaries who followed orders. The result was a system that could kill millions with terrifying speed. The architects of annihilation may not have carried rifles or pulled levers themselves, but their signatures, directives, and inspections carried the weight of death. Their offices, filled with maps, reports, and timetables, were as lethal as any weapon by the beginning of 1942. This team was in place. The camps were being constructed, the staff assembled, and the ghettos prepared for liquidation. Himmler had demanded that Poland's Jews be annihilated, and Globocnik and his staff were ready to obey. The architects had drawn their blueprints, and soon the machinery of extermination would roar to life. To fully grasp how Operation Reinhard was carried out, one must look beyond the towering figures like Himmler and Globocnik and examine the network of men who operated under them, each one adding a vital cog to the machinery of genocide. These were not nameless shadows. They were officers, administrators, and technical staff whose careers were shaped by loyalty to the Nazi regime and whose personal choices etched death into the history of Poland's Jews. Christian Worth, perhaps the most notorious among them, earned the grim nickname Christian the Terrible. His reputation for brutality was well known even among the SS. He brought to Poland not only experience in constructing and supervising gas chambers but also an unrelenting commitment to discipline. He was said to stride through camps with a whip in hand, ready to strike prisoners or staff who showed hesitation. His role as inspector of the Operation Reinhard camps gave him sweeping authority, making him both feared and indispensable. The system of extermination owed much of its ruthless efficiency to his insistence on order and speed. Another key figure was Franz Stangl, who would later serve as commandant of Sobibor and then Treblinka. Unlike Worth, Stangl projected an air of calm professionalism. He saw himself as an administrator rather than a killer, describing his role after the war in cold, detached terms. He claimed to focus on organization, transport schedules, and staff management, distancing himself from the slaughter that took place within the gas chambers. Yet his denial only underscored the banality of evil. In ensuring smooth operations, he made the killing of hundreds of thousands possible. His competence, his refusal to confront the human reality of his work, turned him into one of the deadliest commandants of the Holocaust. Irmfried Eberl, the first commandant of Treblinka, also came from the euthanasia program. A physician by training, he had overseen gas chamber operations in Germany before being sent east. His tenure at Treblinka, however, was short-lived. His chaotic management led to disorder, overcrowding, and panic in the camp. Thousands of corpses piled up without being buried or burned, creating a stench that drifted for miles. The SS quickly judged him incapable, and he was replaced by Stangl. Yet Eberl's appointment itself reveals the direct pipeline between the so-called euthanasia, killings in Germany, and the industrial extermination in Poland. Medical men who once swore to heal became engineers of mass death. Beside them stood figures like Hermann Höfel, Globoknik's deputy and one of the chief coordinators of deportations. Höfel was instrumental in ensuring that trains ran on schedule, that ghettos were emptied systematically, and that the flow of victims never ceased. His efficiency was chillingly revealed after the war in the Höfel telegram, a coded message sent in 1943 that listed the number of Jews murdered at the Reinhard camps up to that point. Over 1.2 million souls reduced to a series of statistics transmitted like an inventory report. Other officers filled commandant and staff roles in the camps. Gustav Wagner, known as the Beast of Sobibor, whose sadism terrorized prisoners. Kurt Franz, the last commandant of Treblinka, remembered for his cruelty. And his dog named Barry, trained to attack prisoners, and Joseph Oberhauser, Worth's deputy inspector, who helped standardize killing techniques across camps. Many of these men came from Austria, reflecting how deeply Nazi ideology had taken root there, and many had already served in T4, carrying their grim expertise eastward. These leaders were supported by a broader corps of guards and auxiliaries. Not all were Germans. In fact, many came from territories under German occupation. Ukrainians, Latvians, and others were recruited, trained at the SS training camp at Treblinka, and deployed to staff the Reinhard camps. Known as Treblinkas, these auxiliaries played key roles in guarding prisoners, herding deportees, and even operating parts of the killing process. Their presence allowed the SS to maintain relatively small German staffs while still running camps that processed thousands of victims daily. What stands out in examining these architects and their subordinates is the fusion of ideology and pragmatism. Some, like Himmler and Globocnik, were driven by ideological fervor, convinced that extermination was a sacred mission. Others, like Stengel or Hoefel, seemed motivated more by duty, careerism, or the desire to prove their competence. Still others reveled in cruelty, taking personal satisfaction in domination and violence. Different motives converged into a single outcome: the annihilation of Poland's Jews. The organization of Operation Reinhard reflected this convergence. Himmler gave the order and set the overall goal. Globocnik ensured resources and authority flowed from the SS leadership in Berlin to the camps in Poland. Wirth established the technical framework of mass killing, drawing from his T4 experience. Commandants like Stengel implemented these frameworks on the ground, while deputies like Hoefel handled logistics. Treblinka guards provided the manpower to enforce terror. Together, this network functioned with alarming precision. It is easy to imagine such men as monsters set apart from ordinary humanity. But their ordinariness is precisely what makes them so disturbing. They had families, careers, and ambitions. Some spent evenings with colleagues, drinking or listening to music, before returning to their posts the next morning to oversee death. They signed papers, reviewed rosters, and managed schedules as if they were running a factory, not a slaughterhouse. The efficiency of Operation Reinhard was not born of demonic genius but of bureaucratic diligence and human adaptability. Applied to the most inhuman ends. By the summer of 1942, the architects were ready. Belzec was operational, Sobibor was preparing to open, and Treblinka's construction was nearly complete. Himmler demanded results, and Globocnik assured him they would come. The staff had been assembled, the methods refined, and the ghettos primed for liquidation. The blueprints had been drawn by ideology, the framework built by bureaucracy, and the machinery staffed by willing men. The architects of annihilation had finished their preparations. What remained was the grim execution of their plan, which would soon engulf the Jewish communities of Poland in an unprecedented wave of death. Chapter 4. Setting the stage. Ghettos, deportations, and the machinery of control. When Germany conquered Poland in 1939, the country became more than just occupied territory. For the Nazis, it was a vast testing ground where their racial policies could be implemented on a scale unimaginable in the German Reich itself. In the heart of Poland, under the new administrative entity known as the General Government, the Jewish population was trapped, and it was here that the groundwork for Operation Reinhard was laid. Before extermination camps came into existence, the ghettos became the first stage in the machinery of destruction. The idea of the ghetto was not new. Medieval Europe had once confined Jews to walled districts, forcing them to live separately from Christian populations. But in Nazi-occupied Poland, the ghetto was reinvented as a modern instrument of control. It was at once a prison, a labor reservoir, and a staging area for deportation. The largest and most infamous was the Warsaw Ghetto, created in late 1940. Nearly 500,000 Jews were forced into a space barely large enough for a fraction of that number. Streets became so crowded that people struggled to walk without bumping into one another. Apartments designed for one family suddenly held 4 or 5. Disease spread easily, and hunger gnawed at every household. Food rationing was deliberately cruel. Jews received a fraction of the calories allotted to Germans and even Poles. Starvation became the daily reality, and smuggling became a matter of survival. Children slipped through cracks in walls or tunnels beneath fences, risking their lives to bring in bread or potatoes. German guards shot many of them on sight, yet the smuggling networks persisted, sustained by the sheer will to live. Doctors inside the ghettos documented the effects of prolonged hunger: emaciated children with swollen bellies, adults too weak to walk. These reports would later serve as haunting testimony to the conditions imposed by Nazi policy. Other cities experienced similar horrors. In Lodz, the ghetto became a center of forced labor, where Jewish workers toiled in factories producing goods for the German war effort. The head of the Jewish council there, Mordecai Chaim Rumkowski, believed that labor might secure survival. His infamous slogan, "Give me your labor and I will give you bread," reflected the desperate calculus of trying to bargain with the occupiers. Yet, despite the appearance of order, the Lodz ghetto was no safer than Warsaw. Hunger, disease, and periodic deportations kept the community in constant fear. Across Poland, ghettos sprouted like islands of misery. Krakow, Lublin, Białystok, and dozens more. Each had its own Jewish council or Judenrat imposed by the Germans. These councils were tasked with administering daily life, distributing food, enforcing regulations, organizing labor details, and eventually compiling lists for deportation. The Judenrat lived under impossible pressure. They were caught between the demands of the SS and the desperate needs of their communities. Some attempted to shield their people as best they could, others became notorious for collaboration, and many faced unbearable moral dilemmas. The ghettos were not only centers of suffering, they were also engines of deception. By confining Jews behind walls, the Nazis created the illusion that the Jewish question was being solved through segregation. Many Jews hoped that by enduring these hardships, they might outlast the war or be resettled to safer areas. German propaganda encouraged this belief, speaking of resettlement in the East rather than extermination. Posters and announcements described deportations as work assignments or relocations, fostering a fragile hope that the ordeal might not end in death. Yet by 1941, the ghettos had become unsustainable even in German eyes. Overcrowding and disease threatened to spill over into surrounding populations, undermining German control. More importantly, Nazi leadership was preparing to move from segregation to annihilation. The ghettos, once seen as holding pens, were about to be transformed into killing funnels, where entire communities could be rounded up and transported to extermination camps. The machinery of deportation relied heavily on Poland's extensive railway network. German officials realized that trains, the backbone of modern transportation, could also serve as instruments of mass murder. Deportations began in stages, first removing smaller groups of Jews to labor camps. But as Operation Reinhard approached, the system expanded dramatically. Special rail schedules were drawn up, prioritizing Jewish transports alongside military and economic shipments. Trains became the veins of Operation Reinhard, pumping human cargo from ghettos into the killing centers that were being prepared. The deportation process itself was designed to strip away dignity. Families were ordered to gather at assembly points with only a small bundle of belongings. They often believed they were being sent to labor camps, so they packed bread, clothing, or household tools. German soldiers and local collaborators drove them with whips, rifle butts, and shouted orders. At railway stations, chaos reigned as people were crammed into cattle cars. Wooden freight wagons with no seats, little ventilation, and a bucket in the corner for waste. Dozens, sometimes more than 100 people, were packed into each car. Journeys lasted hours or days, and many died en route from suffocation, thirst, or heat. The SS and police coordinated these deportations with precision. The hopeful telegram, later discovered after the war, revealed how meticulously numbers were tracked: tens of thousands from one ghetto, hundreds of thousands from another. What appeared to be logistical details, schedules, quotas, car allocations, were in fact the blueprint of genocide. The same bureaucratic order that characterized German efficiency was turned into a weapon of mass death. For the Jews still inside the ghettos, uncertainty bred both despair and resistance. Some clung to rumors that deportation meant resettlement, that survival might be possible elsewhere. Others, especially underground groups, began to suspect the truth, that deportation was a death sentence. These whispers sparked early resistance movements, though in 1941 and early 1942 they remained small and poorly armed. For most, survival meant enduring day-to-day, finding food, avoiding selections, and hoping against hope that the tide might turn. By the spring of 1942, the ghettos were primed for liquidation. The railways were ready, the camps nearly complete, and the SS determined to begin the mass deportations that would define Operation Reinhard. The ghettos had served their grim purpose. They concentrated Jewish communities, weakened them through starvation and disease, and made them vulnerable to the next step. Soon, trains would depart not for labor camps but for places designed solely for killing. The machinery of control was in place, and its lethal efficiency was about to be unleashed. As 1942 dawned over occupied Poland, the ghettos that had once been grim holding pens were now the staging grounds for an unprecedented wave of deportation. The Nazi leadership, having refined its plans and trained its staff, was ready to convert human lives into raw numbers, funneled toward extermination. The process was not spontaneous. It was a carefully orchestrated operation that relied on the coordination of multiple branches of the German state, all under the watchful eye of Himmler and the operational control of Globocnik. The first step in this deadly choreography involved tightening control within the ghettos. Jewish councils were compelled to compile precise rosters of all inhabitants, detailing names, ages, and occupations. The SS demanded this information not as a courtesy but as a practical necessity. Every individual was to be accounted for, because when the deportation trains began to run, every person would be sent to their calculated fate. The meticulous record-keeping was part of a broader philosophy that treated genocide not as chaos but as administration, organized, documented, and efficient. Local German police, alongside auxiliary forces recruited from occupied territories, enforced the SS rules inside the ghettos. Streets were patrolled constantly, curfews strictly enforced, and gatherings prohibited. Any act of defiance, whether smuggling, secret schooling, or religious observance, was punishable by death. The walls of the ghettos were not merely barriers. They were instruments of psychological control, constantly reminding the inhabitants that escape was nearly impossible. The daily environment was carefully structured to break spirits while keeping people alive long enough for deportation. Deportation trains were the next phase, a logistical marvel in their own grim way. Each ghetto had a timetable, a list of quotas, and a sequence of departures. Families were given minimal notice, often only hours, to pack a few personal belongings. They were herded to collection points, sometimes with the help of Jewish police who were coerced into obedience, and loaded into crowded freight cars. Each journey was designed to inflict suffering. Windows were sealed or blocked, water was scarce, and temperatures fluctuated dangerously. Many died en route, a testament to the Nazis' cruel efficiency in maximizing suffering even before arrival at the camps. The trains themselves were part of a broader system of organization. The SS coordinated schedules down to the minute, ensuring that the flow of people from Warsaw, Lodz, and Lublin could continue without interruption. Station masters, engineers, and conductors, whether willing or coerced, became inadvertent participants in genocide. Every wagon, every mile, and every departure became a link in a chain leading directly to death. The efficiency of the railway system transformed Poland into a network through which millions could be annihilated. Behind the deportations, the extermination camps were being finalized. Belzec was the first to open, followed by Sobibor and Treblinka. Each was designed to kill quickly and conceal evidence of murder. Arrival procedures at the camps were standardized. Passengers were ordered to leave the trains in an orderly line, separated by sex, and then guided to undressing areas. Guards kept the victims moving, ensuring no pauses that might allow reflection or resistance. Once inside the gas chambers, carbon monoxide or other lethal gases ended their lives within minutes. Bodies were then cremated or buried in mass pits, the remains reduced to ash or soil, erasing almost every trace of existence. The psychological aspect of control extended to both perpetrators and victims. For the SS officers and camp staff, routines were carefully maintained to depersonalize the killings. Paperwork, schedules, and bureaucratic oversight created a sense of order that allowed murder to be seen as administrative work. For the victims, deception was maintained to prevent panic. The Nazis used signs, fake showers, and false assurances to keep people compliant until the final moments. This combination of terror and deception amplified the efficiency of Operation Reinhard, turning fear and confusion into tools of genocide. Inside the ghettos, a different kind of survival struggle continued. Underground networks smuggled food, medicine, and information. Secret schools taught children literacy and history, and clandestine cultural events, plays, concerts, lectures, sought to maintain humanity in the face of annihilation. These acts of resistance, though small compared to the scale of the Nazi operation, provided hope and identity. They also posed risks. Discovery often meant immediate execution. Nevertheless, human resilience persisted even as the mechanisms of death closed. Deportations accelerated in the spring and summer of 1942. The scale of horror became visible to the remaining inhabitants. Rumors of extermination camps spread quickly, carried by escapees, smugglers, and whispered word of mouth. Families began to grasp the grim reality. The trains did not lead to labor, resettlement, or survival. They led to death. Panic mingled with disbelief, hope with terror. The machinery of control, the ghettos, the Judenrat, the railways, and the camps, had been constructed so thoroughly that even the most desperate resistance seemed nearly impossible. Yet, small acts of defiance persisted. Some Jews hid in cellars or secret rooms, waiting for moments when guards were distracted. Others attempted to bribe officials or forge papers to escape deportation. Even in the face of imminent annihilation, the human spirit clung to life. These stories of resistance, though overshadowed by mass murder, illustrate the complexity of life under the shadow of Operation Reinhard. Survival required courage, cunning, and luck, yet the overwhelming machinery of control left little room for either. By the summer of 1942, the stage was fully set. Ghettos had been emptied systematically, trains carried thousands daily to the death camps, and the Reinhard staff ensured that every aspect of this process operated like a grimly precise machine. The combination of bureaucracy, logistics, and terror created a system in which millions of lives could be erased with shocking efficiency. The Nazi architects had transformed Poland into the central arena of industrialized murder, where human suffering was organized, timed, and executed without hesitation. The world outside these walls and rail lines often remained unaware of the scale of what was happening. From Berlin to Paris, from London to New York, few could imagine that the machinery of modern society, trains, offices, factories, even record-keeping, was being repurposed to exterminate entire communities. In Poland, however, the process was already underway. Deportations were no longer sporadic. They were continuous, relentless, and methodical. The machinery of control, once invisible, was now fully operational, preparing to sweep the remaining Jewish population into the maw of the extermination camps. Chapter 5: Belzec, the prototype of industrial killing. In the spring of 1942, as Operation Reinhard began in earnest, Belzec emerged as the first prototype of the Nazis' industrialized killing machine. Unlike concentration camps or forced labor facilities, Belzec was designed from the ground up with a singular purpose: extermination. Its creation marked a turning point in the Holocaust, transforming mass murder from sporadic shootings and ghetto hardships into a systematic, bureaucratically organized process capable of annihilating thousands of lives daily. Belzec was located in southeastern Poland, near the village of the same name, chosen for its isolation and accessibility. Surrounded by forests and far from major population centers, it allowed the Nazis to operate in secrecy. At the same time, its position was ideal for rail transport. Poland's extensive railway network could funnel hundreds of thousands of victims from ghettos across the general government directly to the camp. The location reflected the Nazi priority of efficiency combined with concealment, ensuring that the operation could proceed with minimal disruption to the surrounding areas and with little risk of public knowledge. Globocnik, as the SS and police leader of Lublin, oversaw the establishment of Belzec. He coordinated with Christian Wirth, who brought technical expertise from the T4 euthanasia program. Wirth, known for his ruthless discipline, supervised the camp's design and operations. Together, they ensured that Belzec was not a haphazard killing site but a meticulously organized facility. Construction involved both German engineers and local laborers, many of whom were unaware of the camp's final purpose. Fences were erected, gas chambers constructed, and cremation pits dug, all with careful attention to both speed and concealment. Belzec's staff combined experience, ideology, and cruelty. Commandants, many of whom had served in the T4 euthanasia program, oversaw operations with cold efficiency. Guards included German SS men and Traniki-trained auxiliaries from Ukraine, Latvia, and other occupied territories. Each person had a designated role, whether directing deportees, operating the gas chambers, managing logistics, or disposing of corpses. This division of labor transformed mass murder into a factory-like operation, with procedures repeated daily to maximize efficiency. The arrival of deportees at Belzec followed a horrifyingly standardized process. Trains arrived from ghettos such as Lublin, Warsaw, and Krakow, each carrying hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people crammed into cattle cars. Guards directed the victims from the train to a selection area, where they were forced to relinquish any remaining possessions. Families were separated, and those who resisted were beaten or shot on the spot. Deception was a critical element. Victims were told they were being resettled or sent to work, kept in line until the last possible moment. Once processed, Prisoners were led to undressing areas and then into gas chambers. Belzec utilized carbon monoxide as its primary killing agent, supplied either from engine exhaust or pressurized cylinders. The chambers were designed to appear as shower rooms, with doors and false fixtures creating an illusion of normalcy. This deception reduced panic and resistance, allowing the staff to maintain a steady flow of victims. Death came quickly, often within minutes, after which the corpses were removed and disposed of in mass graves or cremated in specially prepared pits. Belzec operated on a scale that was unprecedented at the time. Daily, thousands of lives could be extinguished, with the camp eventually claiming the deaths of an estimated 434,000 to 500,000 Jews in less than 2 years of operation. This efficiency demonstrated both the horrifying capability of the Nazi bureaucracy and the effectiveness of their methods refined from previous programs. The camp served as a model for later extermination sites, proving that industrialized mass murder could be carried out systematically, with little risk of operational failure. The camp's operation relied heavily on psychological manipulation and control. Victims were kept compliant through a combination of fear, deception, and disorientation. Officers spoke calmly, used commands, and ensured that panic did not disrupt the flow. Guards maintained discipline with violence when necessary, creating a climate where resistance was almost impossible. Even minor deviations from routine could be punished with immediate death, reinforcing the sense that survival depended entirely on obedience. Belzec also served as a laboratory for refining killing techniques. Wirth and his staff experimented with ways to increase the speed of gassing, improve corpse disposal, and maintain secrecy. Procedures were meticulously documented and communicated to other camps, forming a template that would later guide Sobibor and Treblinka. The camp thus represented not only a site of death but also a testing ground for industrialized genocide, where experience and method were prioritized over moral or ethical considerations. The human impact of Belzec is staggering. Families were obliterated, communities erased, and survivors were almost non-existent. The camp's victims rarely left first-hand testimony. Those few who did manage to escape provided haunting accounts of the deception, terror, and sudden death that defined life at the camp. Their stories reveal the stark reality behind the statistics. Men, women, and children were stripped of identity, dignity, and life in an operation conducted with calculated precision. Belzec's legacy lies not only in the scale of its killings, but in the precedent it set. It demonstrated that genocide could be systematized, organized, and replicated across multiple sites. As such, it became the prototype for subsequent Reinhard camps, showing how logistics, deception, and bureaucracy could combine to produce a killing machine of unparalleled efficiency. The camp's existence is a chilling reminder of how human ingenuity and organization can be twisted into instruments of unimaginable horror. Following Belzec's establishment, the Nazis quickly moved to replicate its deadly efficiency at Sobibor and Treblinka. Each camp was designed with lessons learned from Belzec in mind, refining the methods of mass murder and improving the bureaucratic and logistical machinery that defined Operation Reinhard. These three camps together became the heart of the Nazis' plan to exterminate the Jewish population of Poland. Sobibor, located in eastern Poland, was built under the direct supervision of Odilo Globocnik and Christian Wirth. Like Belzec, its site was chosen for seclusion yet accessibility to the railway network. Trains arrived daily from ghettos and smaller towns, their passengers unaware that they were approaching a place designed solely for death. Wirth oversaw every detail, from the layout of the camp to the flow of victims from arrival to gas chamber. The camp was smaller than Belzec but equally lethal, structured to ensure that people could be processed with minimal disruption and maximum speed. Treblinka, situated north of Warsaw, became the largest of the Reinhard camps. Its construction began in early 1942 and was directed by Wirth and later managed by Franz Stangl. Treblinka incorporated innovations in gas chamber design and corpse disposal learned from Belzec. The camp was divided into sections, one for administrative functions, one for arrivals and processing, and one for cremation and burial. Special attention was given to concealing the killing process with fences, watchtowers, and fake shower facilities, ensuring that victims remained unaware of their fate until the final moment. The operational flow at these camps followed a terrifyingly standardized procedure. Upon arrival, deportees were ordered to leave trains in an orderly line. Families were separated by gender, and personal belongings were confiscated. Prisoners were moved to undressing areas where clothing was collected, and any signs of hesitation or resistance were met with immediate violence. Guards ensured that victims maintained compliance, often using whips, firearms, or dogs to instill terror. Deception played a crucial role. People were told they were going to work or undergoing delousing, which minimized panic and facilitated the systematic killing process. Once inside the gas chambers, victims were exposed to carbon monoxide gas, delivered through engine exhaust or pressurized cylinders. Death was swift but terrifying, often accompanied by the sounds of panic and screams from those around them. The corpses were then removed and disposed of either through mass graves or cremation. At Treblinka, large open-air cremation pits were employed, a method refined to handle the unprecedented volume of victims. Belzec and Sobibor followed similar protocols, with minor variations in chamber design and disposal techniques, reflecting the continuous experimentation and optimization that characterized Operation Reinhard. The Reinhard camps were not static. They evolved continuously to increase efficiency and conceal evidence. Staff experimented with methods to accelerate the killing process, reduce resistance, and handle the disposal of remains. At Treblinka, for example, wooden platforms and tracks were used to transport bodies from gas chambers to cremation pits with speed and minimal effort. At Sobibor, tunnels and concealed paths allowed corpses to be moved without exposing incoming prisoners to the horror, maintaining the illusion that the camp was a labor or relocation site. The human element within the camps was equally integral to their operation. Commandants like Stangl maintained bureaucratic control while others, including deputies and camp guards, executed the daily tasks of murder. The Treblinka-trained auxiliaries played a crucial role, herding victims, operating equipment, and maintaining order. The division of labor was precise, ensuring that each member of staff knew their role and that operations continued without interruption. Efficiency was not left to chance. It was enforced through discipline, training, and fear. The scale of killings at the Reinhard camps is staggering. Belzec claimed between 434,000 and 500,000 lives. Sobibor accounted for approximately 170,000 to 250,000 deaths, and Treblinka became the deadliest of all, with estimates ranging from 700,000 to 900,000 victims. Combined, the three camps exterminated over 1 million Jews in less than 2 years, demonstrating both the lethal efficiency of the operation and the industrial scale at which it was conducted. These numbers, while immense, represent individuals, families, children, elders, each with a life, a story, and a sudden, violent end. The psychological mechanisms of the camps contributed to their operational success. Victims were often kept unaware of the reality until the last moment, which minimized resistance. Guards and officers relied on routine, documentation, and compartmentalization to maintain order and remove moral hesitation. The system encouraged staff to view the work as administrative rather than moral, reducing empathy and making compliance easier. The convergence of deception, discipline, and logistical precision created an environment where genocide could proceed with industrial efficiency. Survivors were rare, and those who escaped often carried only fragments of memory. At Sobibor, a small number of prisoners organized a revolt in October 1943, temporarily disrupting operations and allowing several dozen to flee. Treblinka experienced smaller escape attempts, though most were recaptured. These acts of resistance, though limited in scale, highlight both the human spirit's resilience and the extreme difficulty of surviving within a well-organized killing machine. The Reinhard camps exemplified the final stage of the Nazis' genocidal blueprint: centralized, mechanized, and bureaucratically managed extermination. Belzec demonstrated the concept. Sobibor and Treblinka refined and perfected it. Together, they illustrate how ideology, logistics, and human cruelty merged to produce one of history's most horrifying operations. By mid-1943, Operation Reinhard had nearly completed its objective: the systematic eradication of Poland's Jewish population. The efficiency and scale of the camps would leave an indelible mark on history, a stark reminder of how human ingenuity can be warped into instruments of mass murder. Chapter 6: Life and Death in the Reinhard Camps. Prisoner experience for the Jews deported to the Reinhard camps, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Life ended almost as soon as it began within the confines of the camp. Unlike concentration or labor camps, these facilities were designed not for imprisonment but for immediate extermination. Survival was rare, escape nearly impossible, and even awareness of the true purpose of the camp often came only moments before death. Yet the experiences of those who did survive, or who witnessed the camps from the margins, reveal the horrifying realities that lay behind the bureaucratic efficiency and statistical abstraction of Operation Reinhard. Upon arrival, deportees were confronted with chaos disguised as order. Families were separated along gender lines. Men were often forced into one area while women and children were herded elsewhere. Those who resisted, even minimally, were struck down on the spot, ensuring that fear and compliance spread rapidly through the crowd. Guards, including both German SS and Treblinka auxiliaries, patrolled every area, shouting orders, brandishing weapons, and sometimes using dogs to maintain control. The atmosphere was designed to prevent resistance and to disorient victims who might otherwise have realized the purpose of the camp. The first step in processing involved the removal of clothing and personal belongings. Trains arriving from ghettos and other holding areas often carried families with bundles containing a few remaining possessions: bread, clothing, small valuables, or letters. These were confiscated, catalogued, and stored, while the prisoners were left with only the barest of garments or none at all. In this way, the camp systematically stripped away not just possessions but dignity, reducing individuals to the most basic human vulnerability: nakedness and exposure. Even before entering the gas chambers, victims were subjected to psychological manipulation. Guards and officers provided false assurances, directing people to showers or delousing facilities, creating the illusion of routine hygiene or labor assignment. This deception was crucial in minimizing panic. Those who suspected the truth were often too weak, hungry, or physically constrained to resist. The Nazis had carefully studied human behavior through their experiences with the euthanasia program and earlier massacres, refining methods to ensure that large groups could be moved, undressed, and confined with minimal disruption. Inside the gas chambers, death came swiftly but was terrifyingly impersonal. Carbon monoxide, whether piped from engine exhaust or supplied through pressurized cylinders, claimed lives within minutes. The chambers themselves were designed to resemble normal rooms, with doors and shower fixtures creating a facade of normalcy. Victims often only realized their fate as the gas began to take effect, a realization that was sudden and overwhelming. The sounds of screams, cries, and panic from those around amplified the horror, yet to the guards this was a routine part of the operation, a scheduled task executed with bureaucratic precision. Disposal of bodies followed immediately. At Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, corpses were transported to pits or cremated on open-air pyres. The method depended on the camp, the volume of victims, and seasonal considerations. At Treblinka, large wooden platforms and tracks allowed bodies to be moved efficiently from gas chambers to cremation sites, reflecting the camp's ongoing refinements in process. In all cases, the goal was to eliminate evidence as rapidly as possible, preventing both health hazards and potential discovery by outside observers. The living conditions outside the gas chambers were no less cruel. Prisoners temporarily kept alive to maintain camp operations, known as Sonderkommandos, were forced to work under constant threat of death. They handled corpses, maintained equipment, and prepared facilities for the next group of deportees. These individuals lived under extreme psychological strain, knowing that their survival depended on participating in the machinery of their own community's destruction. Some tried to document the events in secret, hide messages, or communicate with the outside, acts of defiance that carried immense risk. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion compounded the terror. Even before reaching the gas chambers, deportees often endured long journeys in cattle cars without food, water, or sanitation. At the camps, minimal rations were sometimes provided for those temporarily kept alive for labor, but most were malnourished, dehydrated, and physically weakened. The Nazis understood that weakened bodies were easier to control, less likely to resist, and more compliant, turning starvation into a tool of both physical and psychological domination. Despite these conditions, moments of resistance and resilience occasionally emerged. Small acts of defiance, refusing orders, attempting to communicate with fellow prisoners, or escaping the immediate flow of processing, were met with swift and brutal retaliation. Yet they revealed the persistence of human agency even in the face of overwhelming oppression. Stories of survivors later recounted extraordinary bravery, quick thinking, and sheer luck that allowed them to evade death. These instances, while rare, illustrate that even within the meticulously controlled machinery of extermination, human unpredictability could still surface. The psychological terror of the camps extended beyond immediate physical threats. Deportees often witnessed the fate of others before their own turn, understanding the inevitable cycle but powerless to intervene. The separation of families, the stripping of possessions, and the dehumanizing processes inflicted trauma even on those kept alive for labor. For the Sonderkommandos, each day was a nightmare of ethical compromise. Participate in the system to survive, or refuse and die. This psychological manipulation was central to the Nazis' operational model, ensuring that prisoners remained compliant while the camps functioned with maximum efficiency. In understanding life and death within the Reinhard camps, it is clear that human suffering was both a byproduct and a tool of industrialized murder. The combination of deception, terror, and bureaucratic efficiency created an environment where survival was almost entirely dependent on luck, timing, and the rare intervention of fellow prisoners or sympathetic outsiders. By reducing people to bodies in a process, the Nazis eliminated both resistance and identity, demonstrating the horrifying power of a system designed entirely around the mechanics of death. While the systematic killing at the Reinhard camps dominated daily life, for those who were temporarily spared, survival became a complex balance of obedience, cunning, and endurance. Certain prisoners, often selected for their physical strength or skills, were assigned labor within the camps. They were made to maintain the killing machinery, clean gas chambers, transport bodies, and assist guards in a variety of roles. These individuals, later termed Sonderkommandos, existed in a nightmarish limbo, alive only to facilitate the death of others. Their work was horrific, psychologically devastating, and inescapable. Refusal meant immediate execution. The Sonderkommandos' lives illustrate the unimaginable moral dilemmas forced upon prisoners. Some were ordered to manage corpses, including burning or burying them, while hearing the cries of those still alive. Each day was a test of endurance, as these prisoners confronted both the physical demands of labor and the mental strain of witnessing relentless mass murder. Some attempted secret documentation, hiding scraps of paper, or memorizing names and events to preserve the reality of the atrocities. Despite the extreme risks, these acts of resistance were critical in ensuring that the world would later know the truth of what occurred within the camps. Even for those not selected for labor, life at the camps was a brief and terrifying experience. Victims were constantly shuffled, herded, and managed with brutal efficiency. Families were torn apart, and children were often separated from their parents immediately upon arrival. Many adults attempted to protect their children or resist the process in small ways, but the system was designed to crush such efforts. The psychological terror of knowing what was happening, or even suspecting it, was compounded by the rapidity of the process. The moment of arrival often became the moment of death. Deception played a significant role in maintaining order. Nazi officers, drawing on prior experience in the euthanasia program, designed the camps to minimize panic and resistance. Signs, uniforms, and false facilities created the impression of routine processing or work. Victims were told to undress for showers or delousing, often under the pretense that this was a necessary administrative step. The camp staff understood that confusion, fear, and compliance could all be manipulated to ensure that the flow of victims to the gas chambers remained uninterrupted. The process was deliberately impersonal, transforming individuals into objects to be managed. Guards rarely interacted with prisoners as people. Instead, they were directed to follow procedures that stripped away identity. Families were broken into groups, personal belongings confiscated, and bodies handled with clinical precision. This impersonal treatment not only increased efficiency but also reduced the psychological burden on staff, allowing them to perform mass murder with shocking detachment. Despite the overwhelming machinery of death, acts of defiance, however limited, occurred. At Sobibor, for instance, prisoners organized a revolt in October 1943. Using smuggled weapons and careful planning, they managed to kill several guards and set parts of the camp ablaze. While many escapees were recaptured or killed, a number successfully fled and survived, providing the world with first-hand testimony of the camp's operations. This uprising, though rare, highlighted both the extraordinary courage of prisoners and the inherent vulnerabilities in even the most tightly controlled killing systems. At Treblinka, smaller-scale acts of resistance also occurred. Prisoners sometimes attempted to sabotage equipment, hide corpses, or exchange information about escape routes. Some memorized the layout of the camp or the timing of guard rotations, preparing for moments when survival might be possible. These acts, while often costly in terms of human life, reveal that even under extreme conditions, the human instinct for freedom and agency could not be entirely extinguished. The sheer scale of death at the Reinhard camps created a unique and terrifying environment. Unlike the sporadic violence of mass shootings or the chaotic conditions of ghettos, the camps were meticulously planned to handle thousands of victims daily. Staff relied on strict schedules, divided responsibilities, and the psychological manipulation of prisoners to maintain continuous operation. Each stage, from transport to processing to disposal, was a carefully orchestrated part of the killing cycle. The prisoner's awareness of this process added another layer of terror, as hope and despair existed simultaneously in a fragile, fleeting balance. Survival often depended on random chance, quick thinking, and the ability to exploit tiny gaps in the system. A momentary distraction, the intervention of a fellow prisoner, or sheer luck could mean the difference between life and death. Those who survived often carried lifelong trauma, having witnessed unimaginable atrocities and having been forced into impossible moral compromises. Their testimonies later revealed the complexity of life within the camps. Not only the mechanics of extermination, but also the enduring human struggle for dignity and survival amidst systematic annihilation. Reflecting on the prisoner experience, it becomes clear that Operation Reinhard was not merely a series of killings. It was a comprehensive system designed to dehumanize, terrorize, and eliminate entire populations with industrial efficiency. The camps, the deportations, the deception, and the bureaucratic organization worked together to create a reality in which death was both omnipresent and normalized. Yet even within this system, the resilience of human beings, whether through small acts of defiance, documentation, or survival, offers a glimpse into the endurance of the human spirit under extreme oppression. By the end of 1943, the Reinhard camps had achieved their horrific objectives. Millions of Jews had been exterminated, and only fragments of resistance or survival remained to testify to the experiences of those who endured the machinery of death. Understanding their daily realities, their fear, and their courage is essential to comprehending the full scale and human impact of Operation Reinhard, which remains one of history's most chilling examples of organized, bureaucratic genocide. Chapter 7. The Logistics of Mass Murder, Trains, Coordination, and Bureaucracy. Operation Reinhard was not only an atrocity of unimaginable scale but also a logistical masterpiece in the grimmest sense. While history often focuses on the camps themselves, the efficiency and industrial precision of the deportations, transportation networks, and bureaucratic coordination were equally critical in facilitating genocide. The Nazis relied on Germany's highly developed infrastructure, meticulous planning, and the complicity of countless officials, both German and local, to carry out the systematic murder of millions of Jews in Poland. The center of this operation was the railway system. Poland, with its extensive network of tracks and stations, provided the ideal arteries for moving large populations quickly and efficiently. The Nazis utilized freight trains, wooden, windowless cattle cars designed to transport goods, as vessels for human cargo. Each car was crammed with as many people as possible, often exceeding 100 individuals, with no seating, minimal ventilation, and a single bucket for sanitation. Conditions inside the cars were dire. Suffocation, dehydration, heat, and cold claimed lives even before arrival at the camps. These trains were not merely transportation. They were mobile instruments of terror, serving both practical and psychological purposes. The scheduling of trains was a highly bureaucratic process. Every ghetto had quotas, and the SS meticulously coordinated departures to maintain a continuous flow of deportees to the Reinhard camps. Engineers, station masters, and railway officials, often ordinary men carrying out orders, played essential roles in this system. Timetables were calculated to maximize throughput, and trains were prioritized alongside other wartime logistics, reflecting the horrifying normalization of mass murder within the machinery of the German state. The Hofel telegram, discovered after the war, even documented the exact numbers of Jews deported to Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, demonstrating how bureaucracy and killing were intertwined. Coordinating the collection of deportees from ghettos to railheads required cooperation from multiple levels of administration. Judenrat, the Jewish councils imposed within the ghettos, were forced to provide lists of residents and manage internal compliance. German police oversaw the assembly points, ensuring that people were gathered and moved efficiently. Local collaborators sometimes assisted, further extending the reach of Nazi control. Every stage of this process, from rounding up prisoners to loading them onto trains, was organized with precision, minimizing delays and maximizing the number of people transported to the camps. The deportations themselves were carefully choreographed events. Families were separated, personal belongings confiscated, and individuals were ordered into specific cars. Guards, dogs, and firearms maintained discipline, ensuring that panic did not disrupt the operation. The psychological impact of the journey was immense. Victims were crammed together, often in darkness, without water or food, sometimes for days. Many perished en route, a tragic and unintended, yet unsurprising byproduct of the Nazis' emphasis on speed and efficiency. The trains became mobile extensions of the camps, carrying the machinery of death into the heart of Jewish communities. Bureaucracy extended beyond transportation. The SS maintained detailed records of arrivals, departures, and the number of people killed. Commandants at each camp were required to report daily numbers, train schedules, and operational status. Supervisors like Christian Wirth and Franz Stangl ensured that these records were accurate, providing Berlin with a clear picture of the progress of the extermination campaign. This documentation illustrates how the Holocaust was not chaotic. It was systematic, organized, and meticulously recorded, reflecting the terrifying integration of administration with mass murder. Logistics also included the construction and maintenance of the camps themselves. Each Reinhard camp, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, was strategically designed for efficient killing. Gas chambers, cremation pits, and disposal systems were built to handle thousands of victims daily. Materials, labor, and technical expertise were coordinated by the SS and its affiliates, with engineers, carpenters, and laborers following strict instructions. Even small details, like the positioning of fences, watchtowers, and paths, were planned to maintain the flow of people and minimize disruption, turning the camp into a deadly assembly line. Communication was another key element. Orders were transmitted from Berlin to Globocnik and the camp commandants, often through secure channels, telegrams, or couriers. Any miscommunication could slow deportations or reduce the efficiency of the killing process, so a culture of strict adherence to instructions was enforced. Guards and staff were expected to follow protocols exactly, and deviations were punished severely. The combination of hierarchy, documentation, and strict discipline ensured that the operation continued seamlessly across multiple camps and regions. Local populations, although not directly involved in camp operations, were affected by the logistics of Operation Reinhard. Railway schedules, deportation notices, and temporary closures of towns for roundup operations disrupted daily life. Many locals witnessed the transports or the movement of guards, fueling rumors and fear. Yet the Nazis often maintained secrecy about the final destination and purpose of the trains, sustaining the illusion of resettlement or labor, which prevented widespread public intervention and enabled the continuation of the operation without significant interference. The success of this logistical system was one of the most chilling aspects of Operation Reinhard. It demonstrated that genocide could be industrialized, normalized, and managed as a complex operation spanning multiple regions, departments, and personnel. Ordinary infrastructure, trains, stations, offices, was repurposed into tools of mass murder, while ordinary humans, often bureaucrats or railway officials, became facilitators of death through compliance and routine. The integration of logistics, transportation, and administration into the killing process transformed the Holocaust from isolated atrocities into a systematic, organized campaign of industrial-scale extermination. By mid-1942, the coordination of trains, staff, and administrative systems was operating at peak efficiency. Thousands of people were being transported daily to the Reinhard camps, each step of the operation monitored, recorded, and enforced. The machinery of genocide, built on logistics, bureaucracy, and infrastructure, had reached a level of precision that allowed Operation Reinhard to carry out its grim mission with relentless effectiveness, leaving behind a legacy of horror and a cautionary tale about the potential misuse of organization and order. As Operation Reinhard progressed, the Nazis' focus on logistical precision became increasingly evident. The transportation network, previously designed to move goods and people for economic purposes, was systematically adapted to facilitate genocide. Each railway line, station, and scheduling office became a cog in the machinery of death. The scale of coordination required to move thousands of people daily from ghettos to extermination camps demanded meticulous planning, bureaucratic oversight, and unwavering discipline from all involved. One of the most critical elements in the logistics of Operation Reinhard was the synchronization between ghetto authorities, the German police, and the SS. The Judenräte, under constant threat of violence, were forced to compile rosters of every resident, organize daily work schedules, and manage compliance for deportation. In cities like Warsaw, Lublin, and Lodz, these councils became unwilling facilitators, preparing people for transport while attempting, often in vain, to mitigate suffering. Lists were submitted to German officials, and strict quotas were imposed. Failure to meet deadlines could result in violent reprisals or even mass executions within the ghetto itself. The Nazis' attention to timing was exacting. Deportation trains had to fit within pre-existing schedules for military supplies, raw materials, and essential goods. Each train carried a precise number of victims, calculated to avoid overcrowding that might disrupt the operation, yet maximizing efficiency. Station masters and railway employees, who may have viewed themselves as simply performing routine duties, were in fact integral to the functioning of the genocide. Tracks were cleared, rolling stock maintained, and schedules adhered to with precision. The appearance of routine and order disguised the extraordinary human tragedy unfolding within each car. Camp commandants and officers played a parallel role in maintaining operational efficiency. Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka were designed to receive trains, process deportees, and dispose of corpses with clockwork precision. Staff assigned specific roles. Some herded victims, others managed belongings, and specialized teams operated gas chambers or cremation pits. Training emphasized the importance of procedure, reducing the likelihood of hesitation or error. Commanders monitored every step, issuing daily reports to higher authorities, documenting the numbers of deportees processed, and ensuring that the trains ran on schedule. This combination of military discipline and bureaucratic oversight created a system capable of handling vast numbers of victims with horrifying efficiency. The role of the SS and auxiliary forces, including Traniki-trained guards from Ukraine and other occupied regions, was also crucial. These personnel provided the physical enforcement needed to maintain order and compliance. They patrolled stations, directed victims into cars, and supervised the loading and unloading of trains at camps. Their presence was intended to prevent resistance and panic, ensuring that deportations could proceed without disruption. Despite their relatively small numbers, they were able to control massive groups of people through fear, weapons, and coordinated effort, demonstrating how psychological manipulation was intertwined with logistics. Deception played a continuous role in sustaining compliance. Many victims believed they were being transported to labor or resettlement camps. Signs, guards' instructions, and even small gestures like providing minimal provisions for the journey created the illusion of routine. This deception reduced panic and facilitated orderly boarding, proving that logistical efficiency was not merely mechanical but psychological. The Nazis understood that controlling perception was as vital as controlling physical movement. Documentation and record-keeping formed another essential layer of control. Every train arrival and departure was logged, and the number of people transported was meticulously counted. Records were compiled and transmitted up the chain of command to Globocnik and the Reich Security Main Office in Berlin. This level of oversight ensured that the Nazis could monitor progress, adjust schedules, and measure the effectiveness of each operation. The bureaucracy of death mirrored the bureaucracies of everyday governance, with forms, reports, and directives ensuring that human lives were reduced to data points in a system designed for annihilation. Even minor disruptions were carefully managed. Delays due to mechanical failure, weather, or resistance were addressed immediately through contingency planning. Reserve personnel, backup trains, and alternative routes were organized to prevent interruptions in the flow of victims. The efficiency of this system allowed the Nazis to maintain continuous deportations over months and years, demonstrating a terrifying level of industrialized murder that depended as much on planning as on ideology. Local populations, while generally not directly involved, were sometimes coerced into supporting the system. Civilians provided labor, supplies, or surveillance under threat of punishment. Others witnessed the movement of trains and deportations, sometimes forming rumors or aiding escapes. However, the Nazi combination of secrecy, intimidation, and administrative control minimized widespread interference. The impression of ordinary administration, railway schedules, bureaucratic forms, and organized labor masked the true horror of the operation, allowing genocide to proceed largely uninterrupted. By mid-1943, the logistical machinery of Operation Reinhard had reached its peak efficiency. Trains departed daily, deporting thousands to Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Camps received, processed, and disposed of victims with systematic precision, while administrative oversight ensured that each stage of the operation was recorded, monitored, and optimized. The combination of transportation networks, bureaucracy, personnel, and deception created an integrated system in which genocide could be carried out on an unprecedented scale. Understanding the logistics behind Operation Reinhard reveals the horrifying extent to which infrastructure, routine, and organization were weaponized for mass murder. The trains, the schedules, the reports, and the administration were not merely support systems, they were integral to the killing process itself. Ordinary components of society, from railways to clerks, became enablers of one of history's most meticulously executed genocides. In examining this system, one can grasp both the human ingenuity behind logistics and the terrifying moral corruption of an operation designed to annihilate millions. Chapter 8: Psychological Warfare and Deception. How the Nazis controlled victims. Operation Reinhard was not only a campaign of mass murder but also a masterclass in psychological manipulation. The Nazis understood that the success of their extermination program depended as much on controlling minds as on controlling logistics. Fear, confusion, and deception were essential tools, carefully deployed to minimize resistance and ensure that millions could be transported and killed with terrifying efficiency. Understanding this psychological dimension provides critical insight into how genocide was executed on such a large scale. From the moment deportees were rounded up in ghettos, psychological tactics were in play. Jewish councils, under extreme duress, were compelled to cooperate with Nazi authorities, creating an appearance of order and compliance. Families were often reassured that they were being relocated for work or resettlement. Public announcements emphasized routine procedures, and ghettos were told to assemble lists, pack belongings, and prepare for transportation. This layer of deception encouraged compliance and reduced panic, illustrating that control of perception was a deliberate part of the Nazi strategy. Transportation itself served as a psychological instrument. Victims were loaded into freight cars under the guise of normality, often instructed to bring minimal provisions and told they were traveling to labor or relocation camps. Conditions were overcrowded, unsanitary, and suffocating, but the promise of a destination created a fragile hope. Guards ensured that confusion and fear did not escalate into chaos, using intimidation, barking dogs, or firearms as necessary. The journey was a form of psychological conditioning. By maintaining an illusion of purpose while exerting control, the Nazis kept millions compliant even as they moved towards certain death. Upon arrival at the Reinhard camps, deception intensified. Camps like Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka were deliberately designed to appear ordinary or even sanitary. Victims were guided through fences, fake pathways, and signs pointing to showers or delousing areas. Officers spoke calmly and provided instructions, creating a veneer of normalcy. Even the Sonderkommandos, temporarily forced into labor, operated under psychological control. They were made to normalize the killing process as routine work, stripping the act of its moral weight. This manipulation ensured that panic and resistance remained minimal, despite the scale of atrocities occurring daily. Family separation was another tool of psychological control. Men, women, and children were routinely split upon arrival, often never to be reunited. This tactic served multiple purposes. It undermined social cohesion, prevented coordinated resistance, and shattered emotional support systems. Parents struggled to protect their children, yet the overwhelming control exerted by guards rendered most attempts futile. By isolating individuals from their families and community networks, the Nazis reinforced the sense of helplessness, making compliance a necessity for temporary survival. The Nazis also employed deception through timing and presentation. Victims were kept unaware of the full reality of the camps until the last possible moment. The gas chambers, for example, were disguised as showers or delousing rooms. Doors, signage, and the demeanor of the guards suggested routine procedures rather than impending death. These tactics reduced resistance, as fear of the unknown was more manageable than the confrontation with immediate death. By controlling information, the Nazis maintained operational efficiency while ensuring that the psychological impact of realization occurred too late for escape. The use of authority and uniforms further enhanced compliance. SS officers and auxiliaries wore distinctive uniforms, creating an impression of order, discipline, and power. The presence of dogs, weapons, and watchtowers reinforced the perception that resistance was futile. Guards issued commands calmly but with absolute authority, ensuring that groups moved as directed. Even minor deviations were punished immediately, reinforcing the consequences of disobedience and maintaining the structured flow necessary for the operation. Hunger and deprivation were additional psychological weapons. Victims arriving at the camps were often exhausted from long train journeys, deprived of food, water, or sanitation. These physical vulnerabilities amplified fear and compliance, reducing the likelihood of resistance. The Nazis understood that controlling basic needs could directly influence behavior, and they used this knowledge systematically. The combination of physical deprivation, authority, and deception created an environment in which millions could be managed like objects, stripped of agency, and guided toward their deaths. Inside the camps, small acts of defiance were rare but remarkable. Prisoners attempted to escape, hide, or communicate covertly, but the overwhelming psychological control imposed by guards and the structure of the camps made survival difficult. The fear of immediate execution, coupled with disorientation and isolation, meant that the vast majority of victims were unable to resist effectively. Yet the existence of uprisings, such as at Sobibor, demonstrated that human resilience could persist even under the most extreme psychological pressure. The Nazis' approach combined fear, manipulation, and bureaucratic discipline into a system of psychological domination. Victims were conditioned to comply, deceived to minimize panic, and isolated to prevent resistance. Every element of Operation Reinhard, from the ghetto roundups and train journeys to the camp layout and procedures, was designed to control not just the body but the mind. Understanding this dimension of the Holocaust reveals how genocide was achieved not only through physical force but through a deliberate orchestration of fear, confusion, and deception on a massive scale. By mid-1943, these methods had been refined to near perfection. The psychological tools employed at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka ensured that millions of people could be processed with minimal disruption. Compliance was maintained through a combination of fear, authority, and illusion, illustrating that the Nazis' industrialized genocide relied as much on the manipulation of perception as on logistical efficiency or brute force. This integration of psychological warfare into mass murder remains one of the most chilling aspects of Operation Reinhard, highlighting the deliberate, calculated cruelty behind the historical events. Beyond the initial deception and fear tactics, the Nazis refined psychological control at every stage of Operation Reinhard to ensure maximum compliance and minimal resistance. Their understanding of human behavior, developed through previous programs like T4 euthanasia, allowed them to manipulate victims in ways both subtle and brutal. From the moment of arrival in a ghetto to the final steps within the camps, every detail was designed to maintain obedience, instill terror, and prevent organized defiance. One of the most pervasive methods was the use of routine and repetitive procedures. Victims were subjected to highly standardized processes: roll calls, train embarkations, undressing, and movement toward gas chambers. These repeated rituals created a sense of predictability, which paradoxically made people more compliant. By turning mass murder into a series of familiar steps, the Nazis reduced panic and confusion, making it easier to herd thousands of individuals as though they were livestock rather than human beings. The illusion of routine, coupled with the constant threat of violence, was a powerful psychological tool. The Nazis also leveraged the human tendency to obey authority. Officers and guards presented themselves as official, disciplined, and in control. Their calm demeanor, uniforms, and methodical instructions conveyed the message that resistance was futile. Even in moments of potential chaos, such as during train arrivals or crowd movements within the camps, the presence of armed authority figures created an environment where most victims complied instinctively. The combination of perceived authority and immediate threat ensured that the vast majority followed orders without questioning their ultimate destination. Deception extended to the architecture and layout of the camps themselves. Gas chambers were disguised as shower facilities, with doors, signage, and fake plumbing fixtures giving victims the impression of routine hygiene or delousing. Paths through the camp were designed to prevent direct visibility of corpses or cremation areas, reducing panic and keeping the incoming deportees unaware of their fate. Even the arrangement of fences, guard towers, and administrative buildings contributed to an environment where the flow of people could be tightly controlled without raising suspicion. The manipulation of space and sightlines became a critical part of psychological warfare. Family separation and social isolation were equally effective in weakening victims' resolve. Upon arrival, men, women, and children were segregated, often never to be reunited. This tactic dismantled social bonds and eliminated sources of mutual support, leaving individuals more vulnerable to compliance. Parents and children, siblings and spouses were torn apart, creating a sense of hopelessness and reinforcing the perception that resistance was impossible. By breaking social structures, the Nazis ensured that fear alone could dominate behavior. Communication was tightly controlled. Victims were given misleading instructions, false reassurances, or minimal explanations. Even small truths were carefully withheld to maintain the illusion of resettlement or labor. Guards and officers used selective information to control perception. A minor act of kindness or a provision of water might be presented as evidence that the Nazis were benevolent, while any deviation from expected behavior could trigger immediate punishment. This manipulation of expectation and reality created confusion, making it psychologically easier to shepherd victims toward death. The constant threat of violence served as a tool of psychological conditioning. Immediate punishment for disobedience, hesitation, or resistance reinforced the perception that survival depended entirely on compliance. Physical abuse, shootings, and the use of dogs instilled fear while demonstrating consequences. These methods were not random. They were carefully calculated to maintain discipline among thousands of people at once. Even witnessing the punishment of others reinforced compliance and intensified terror, ensuring that fear became a continuous, controlling force. The Nazis also manipulated hope as a weapon. By promising labor, relocation, or future sustenance, they kept victims psychologically engaged long enough to reach the gas chambers. Tiny acts, such as providing a piece of bread or allowing a brief rest, created a fragile sense of expectation, which made compliance more likely. When these hopes were cruelly extinguished, the emotional shock further destabilized prisoners, reducing their ability to resist in the final moments. The combination of hope and fear became a cycle of psychological domination, ensuring that victims were controlled to the very end. Even the Sonderkommandos were subjected to intricate psychological manipulation. Although they were temporarily spared to handle corpses and maintain camp operations, they lived under constant terror of execution. Their forced participation in killing processes created extreme moral conflict, a calculated means of subjugating both body and mind. This form of coerced complicity ensured that the machinery of death could continue smoothly, with survivors functioning as enforcers of the system in subtle ways. The Nazis' understanding of human psychology extended even to these temporary laborers, ensuring that they remained both compliant and productive. Finally, the effectiveness of psychological warfare was amplified by secrecy and misinformation. Most victims had no prior knowledge of what awaited them at the camps. Rumors circulated, but true understanding was impossible until the final moments. The Nazis controlled what people could see, hear, and comprehend, maintaining the illusion of resettlement or work until the point of death. By manipulating information and perception, the Nazis ensured that terror and compliance were internalized, allowing Operation Reinhard to operate with unprecedented efficiency. The integration of deception, fear, and routine demonstrates that the psychological dimension of Operation Reinhard was as critical as its logistical execution. Controlling the mind of the victim was essential to controlling the flow of human cargo, ensuring that the machinery of mass murder could function with minimal disruption. In combining architectural design, authority, routine, isolation, misinformation, and hope, the Nazis created an environment in which compliance became instinctual, panic minimized, and survival was reduced to random chance. Understanding this aspect of the Holocaust reveals the profound level of planning and cruelty behind one of history's most methodical campaigns of annihilation. Chapter 9. The role of Globocnik and SS leadership in Reinhard At the center of Operation Reinhard's execution was Odilo Globocnik, one of the most pivotal figures in the Nazi machinery of genocide. His leadership, organizational skill, and unwavering ideological commitment made him a crucial force behind the systematic extermination of Poland's Jewish population. Understanding Globoknik's role illuminates not only the operational mechanics of Reinhard but also the way personal ambition, bureaucratic power, and ideological fanaticism combined to create one of history's deadliest operations. Globoknik, born in 1904 in Austria, had a long history of commitment to National Socialist ideals. By the time the Nazis rose to power, he had already established himself as a competent administrator and party loyalist. His early involvement in the SS, combined with his ruthless efficiency, positioned him for tasks requiring both organizational skill and ideological zeal. When the Nazis devised Operation Reinhard, Globoknik was appointed by Heinrich Himmler to oversee the plan in the Lublin district, making him the operational commander of the largest and most lethal phase of the Holocaust in Poland. As head of Operation Reinhard, Globoknik's responsibilities were vast and multifaceted. He coordinated the construction of extermination camps, supervised the selection and training of staff, managed logistics, and ensured the deportation and processing of victims proceeded without disruption. He oversaw Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, but his influence extended far beyond the camps themselves. Globoknik liaised with the SS, police, railway officials, and local collaborators, creating a web of authority that enabled the seamless functioning of Reinhard's genocidal infrastructure. Globoknik's leadership style was marked by a combination of meticulous planning and personal oversight. He personally inspected camps, monitored staff performance, and intervened to resolve problems that could slow operations. Reports from subordinates reveal that he was deeply involved in the daily management of extermination processes, from train arrivals to gas chamber efficiency. This hands-on approach ensured that Reinhard was executed with unprecedented precision. His ability to balance bureaucratic demands, logistical constraints, and ideological objectives made him uniquely effective at a task that required both administrative skill and moral detachment from mass murder. Beneath the operational surface, Globoknik's ideological commitment drove the intensity of the operation. He was a fervent believer in the Nazi vision of racial purity and the annihilation of Jews. Unlike some bureaucrats who approached genocide as a duty or career requirement, Globoknik embraced the mission with zeal, often pushing for increased efficiency and innovation in killing methods. He understood that speed, secrecy, and deception were essential not only to success but also to minimizing resistance. His fanaticism helped maintain morale among staff and set a tone of ruthless determination that permeated the camps. Globoknik worked closely with his subordinate officers, most notably Christian Wirth, who managed day-to-day operations at the camps. Wirth's experience in the T4 euthanasia program brought technical expertise in mass killing, which Globoknik integrated into Reinhard's framework. Their collaboration was a blend of administrative oversight and operational innovation. Globoknik relied on Wirth's knowledge to refine gas chamber processes, corpse disposal methods, and staff organization, demonstrating how leadership at the top translated into lethal efficiency on the ground. Coordination with Berlin was another critical aspect of Globoknik's role. He reported directly to Heinrich Himmler and other high-ranking SS officials, submitting detailed statistics on deportations, camp operations, and overall progress. The infamous Hofel telegram, which documented the number of Jews deported to each Reinhard camp, reflects the level of oversight Globoknik maintained and the importance of precise reporting to the broader Nazi hierarchy. Through these communications, Berlin monitored operations and provided support, while Globoknik ensured that the daily execution of the plan aligned with strategic goals. Globocnik's influence extended into the selection and training of camp personnel. He oversaw the recruitment of German SS officers, Trauniki auxiliaries, and local collaborators, ensuring that they were disciplined, obedient, and capable of carrying out the horrors of mass murder. Training emphasized both technical proficiency and psychological detachment, teaching staff to perform their duties with precision while suppressing empathy or hesitation. This careful preparation reflected Globocnik's understanding that the success of Reinhard depended not only on infrastructure but on human actors who could operate the system efficiently and ruthlessly. Innovation in killing techniques was another hallmark of Globocnik's leadership. He encouraged the refinement of gas chambers, improved corpse disposal methods, and optimized the movement of victims within camps. At Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, these refinements increased daily killing capacity and minimized the risk of disruption. Globocnik's willingness to implement new methods illustrates his pragmatic approach to genocide. He combined ideological fervor with operational pragmatism, creating a system that was both deadly and sustainable over time. The personal authority of Globocnik also played a role in maintaining compliance among subordinates. Officers and camp staff understood that efficiency and adherence to protocol were not merely professional expectations, but demands enforced through fear, hierarchy, and ideological loyalty. His reputation for decisiveness and ruthlessness reinforced discipline, ensuring that Reinhard operated without interruption and that even minor errors were corrected swiftly. This combination of fear and respect created a culture in which mass murder could be executed as a routine administrative task. Through Globocnik's leadership, Operation Reinhard became the most lethal phase of the Holocaust in Poland. His blend of bureaucratic skill, ideological zeal, and operational oversight ensured that Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka functioned as lethal machines of death. By coordinating staff, logistics, infrastructure, and deception, he transformed Reinhard from a theoretical plan into a terrifying reality, demonstrating how leadership at the top could shape the course of one of history's most horrifying genocides. Globocnik's influence extended beyond the camps themselves into the broader Nazi administrative and security apparatus. He maintained regular communication with Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS, ensuring that Operation Reinhard remained a top priority within the SS hierarchy. Himmler, deeply invested in the final solution, relied on Globocnik to execute policy in the Lublin district with precision and discretion. This relationship was mutually reinforcing. Himmler provided resources, authority, and directives, while Globocnik demonstrated operational competence and ideological commitment, solidifying his position as one of the central architects of industrialized genocide. Within this framework, Globocnik exercised autonomy over day-to-day operations while maintaining alignment with higher directives. He coordinated transport schedules, oversaw camp construction, and monitored the performance of officers, ensuring that all elements worked in harmony. Any disruption, delayed trains, uncooperative staff, or operational inefficiencies was addressed swiftly. He was known for his decisiveness and strict enforcement of standards, instilling a sense of urgency among subordinates. Staff quickly learned that any lapse could result in personal reprimand or reassignment to more dangerous duties, further motivating compliance. Globocnik also understood the value of delegating authority while maintaining oversight. Christian Wirth, Franz Stangl, and other camp commanders were given responsibility for specific aspects of the operation, from technical processes to daily personnel management. Globocnik's role was to supervise, coordinate, and ensure adherence to policy, but he trusted his subordinates to manage details within their purview. This balance of centralized authority and delegated responsibility allowed Reinhard to function efficiently across multiple camps and complex logistical networks. His personal management style combined administrative rigor with ruthless pragmatism. Reports from survivors and post-war investigations reveal that Globocnik was deeply involved in refining methods of killing and corpse disposal, sometimes visiting the camps in person to observe processes. He emphasized speed, secrecy, and efficiency, insisting that every step be optimized to handle the maximum number of deportees without disruption. His willingness to intervene directly demonstrates both his dedication to the operation and the hands-on nature of his leadership. Globocnik also worked to maintain the morale and discipline of his subordinates, albeit through fear and ideological reinforcement rather than encouragement. The SS and Trauniki personnel were constantly reminded of the importance of their mission in the context of Nazi racial ideology. Training and indoctrination reinforced the concept of Jews as subhuman and justified the extermination process as a patriotic and morally necessary duty. Globocnik's ability to merge operational management with ideological indoctrination ensured that personnel performed their tasks efficiently while suppressing moral hesitation. In addition to operational oversight, Globocnik was responsible for coordinating the supply chains that sustained the camp's functionality. This included managing transportation for victims, provisions for staff, fuel for engines and crematoria, and construction materials. By ensuring that the camps were continuously supplied, he prevented logistical bottlenecks that could have slowed or halted the killing process. His attention to these seemingly mundane details was critical. Even a minor disruption could compromise the operation, yet under Globocnik's supervision, the system ran with frightening precision. Globocnik's interactions with higher SS leadership also highlight the bureaucratic dimension of Reinhard. He submitted detailed reports to Himmler, providing daily statistics on deportations, arrivals, and the number of victims killed. This data-driven oversight reflects the administrative efficiency of the Holocaust, where human lives were reduced to numbers, charts, and telegrams. Himmler, in turn, used this information to monitor progress, allocate resources, and adjust directives. Globocnik's ability to satisfy both operational demands and bureaucratic reporting requirements underscores the unique combination of organizational skill and ideological zeal that defined his leadership. The integration of new methods and innovations was another hallmark of Globocnik's tenure. He encouraged experimentation in gas chamber operation, corpse disposal, and labor utilization within the camps. This pragmatic approach aimed to maximize efficiency while minimizing disruptions, illustrating how the leadership sought continuous improvement even in the context of mass murder. These innovations were not abstract. They directly increased the number of victims processed daily, reinforcing the industrial nature of Reinhard. Globocnik's role also extended into managing interactions with local populations and collaborators. He coordinated with police units, municipal officials, and auxiliary forces, ensuring that deportations proceeded smoothly. The success of Reinhard depended on this coordination. Delays caused by resistance, logistical mismanagement, or local opposition could compromise the entire operation. Globocnik's administrative skill ensured that such challenges were mitigated, demonstrating his ability to merge bureaucratic control with field operations. Ultimately, Globocnik's leadership exemplified the deadly combination of ideological commitment, bureaucratic skill, and operational oversight. He transformed Operation Reinhard from a theoretical plan into a functional, lethal system capable of exterminating millions with terrifying efficiency. By integrating logistics, personnel management, innovation, and psychological control, he ensured that Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka functioned not only as camps, but as components of a meticulously orchestrated genocide. His role underscores the chilling reality that the Holocaust was not merely a product of hatred, but also of planning, organization, and leadership operating at the highest levels. Chapter 10: Resistance and Uprisings in the Reinhard Camps. Despite the overwhelming brutality, terror, and psychological manipulation imposed by Operation Reinhard, resistance did emerge within the Reinhard camps. Acts of defiance were rare, extraordinarily risky, and often short-lived, yet they reveal the resilience of the human spirit even under the most extreme conditions. Understanding the forms, planning, and execution of these uprisings provides insight into how prisoners maintained agency, courage, and hope in a system designed to eliminate every possibility of autonomy. Resistance in the Reinhard camps took multiple forms. At the most basic level, it included small acts of sabotage or noncompliance. Prisoners sometimes hid tools, disrupted machinery, or delayed labor tasks, subtly undermining the Nazis' efficiency. Even seemingly minor actions were perilous, as the staff maintained strict surveillance and enforced immediate punishment for deviation. These small acts of defiance were significant psychologically, as they allowed prisoners to reclaim a sense of agency and resist total dehumanization. Beyond these minor acts, more organized forms of resistance emerged, particularly among the Sonderkommandos, who were forced to work in close proximity to the killing operations. While their primary function was to manage corpses and maintain the machinery of extermination, some Sonderkommandos began to plan escapes, coordinate information gathering, and attempt to communicate with other prisoners. Their position, horrifying as it was, provided a unique perspective on the layout of the camps, schedules of guards, and weaknesses in security systems. Utilizing this knowledge required extraordinary courage, as any misstep could lead to immediate execution. The most well-documented example of organized resistance occurred at Sobibor in October 1943. Prisoners meticulously planned an uprising over several weeks, taking advantage of knowledge about guard routines, weapon locations, and the camp's layout. Leaders, including prisoners who had been deported from various ghettos and labor camps, coordinated the plan in secrecy, aware that exposure would be fatal. The revolt involved killing SS officers, arming themselves with captured weapons, and attempting to escape into the surrounding forests. While many participants were killed during the breakout or recaptured later, a number succeeded in fleeing and survived to provide testimony about the camp's operations and the uprising itself. Planning such uprisings was incredibly complex and fraught with challenges. Camp layout, guard vigilance, and the psychological trauma experienced by prisoners all posed significant obstacles. Prisoners had to communicate covertly, share information without detection, and coordinate timing precisely. In addition, they faced the challenge of maintaining hope and morale in the midst of constant terror, starvation, and despair. The success of uprisings, even if limited, depended as much on psychological resilience and leadership as on physical planning or strategy. Treblinka also saw instances of resistance, although less well documented than Sobibor. Prisoners attempted to sabotage camp operations, disrupt killing processes, and plan escapes. These efforts were risky, with a high probability of immediate execution if discovered. Nevertheless, they demonstrated that even in a highly controlled and lethal environment, the instinct for survival and defiance persisted. The presence of resistance, however limited, challenged the Nazi assumption that victims could be entirely managed as passive objects within their extermination system. Resistance was often facilitated by external factors as well. The surrounding forests, local partisan networks, and sympathetic civilians occasionally provided opportunities for escape or information exchange. While these networks were not extensive and often compromised by Nazi security measures, they contributed to the planning and execution of uprisings. Knowledge of terrain, hidden routes, and nearby villages could mean the difference between life and death for those attempting to flee the camps. External resistance thus intersected with internal defiance, creating pockets of opportunity within a largely oppressive system. Even unsuccessful attempts at revolt or escape had significance. They disrupted the illusion of absolute control, forced Nazi staff to respond with heightened security, and sometimes resulted in minor operational inefficiencies. For prisoners, these acts provided psychological sustenance, a reminder that resistance was possible, and that even in the face of near-certain death, human agency could persist. The courage required to act under such conditions illustrates the extraordinary mental fortitude of those who dared to resist. The aftermath of uprisings often resulted in brutal reprisals. The Nazis frequently increased surveillance, punished remaining prisoners, and reinforced procedures to prevent further attempts. Despite these consequences, the uprisings left a lasting legacy. They not only enabled some prisoners to escape and survive, but also provided historical testimony about the inner workings of the Reinhard camps, the realities of life under constant threat, and the human drive to resist oppression. Psychologically, resistance reinforced a critical aspect of survival, maintaining a sense of purpose. In an environment designed to strip victims of identity, hope, and autonomy, planning or participating in uprisings provided prisoners with a form of psychological empowerment. Even if the physical outcome was tragic, the act of resistance itself was a statement of defiance against totalitarian control and dehumanization. It preserved dignity, solidarity, and courage under circumstances where surrender was expected. The uprisings at Sobibor and other camps also highlighted the interplay between knowledge, strategy, and courage. Prisoners needed detailed information about guard routines, camp layout, and security weaknesses. They relied on careful observation, memory, and communication, often risking their lives for the chance to escape. These acts were not impulsive. They were calculated, courageous, and highly organized, demonstrating that resistance, even in the most controlled environments, was possible through intelligence, collaboration, and resilience. In conclusion, resistance in the Reinhard camps was limited in scale but immense in significance. Acts ranged from subtle sabotage to full-scale uprisings, each requiring extraordinary courage and careful planning. These efforts reveal the enduring human instinct to resist oppression, the psychological importance of agency, and the capacity for hope even in environments explicitly designed to destroy both body and spirit. Studying these uprisings provides crucial insight into the inner life of the camps, illustrating that even amidst systematic annihilation, human beings retain the ability to act with defiance, strategy, and courage. The uprisings in the Reinhard camps, though few and far between, serve as a testament to human resilience in the face of extreme oppression. Among the most significant and meticulously planned revolts was the Sobibor uprising of October 14, 1943. Prisoners understood that success depended on careful preparation, secrecy, and exploiting every possible weakness in the camp structure. Leadership emerged organically from within the prisoner population, with individuals who had prior experience in ghettos, labor camps, or partisan networks taking responsibility for strategy, coordination, and morale. The Sobibor uprising involved a combination of intelligence gathering and covert preparation. Prisoners studied guard rotations, identified vulnerable points in fences, and located weapons that could be used during the revolt. Tools were smuggled and hidden, and prisoners memorized schedules and escape routes. This intelligence allowed them to plan a precise sequence of attacks, targeting the camp's SS officers and key personnel to minimize resistance and maximize the chance of escape. Planning had to be entirely covert, as any suspicion from guards could result in immediate execution and the collapse of the operation. On the day of the revolt, prisoners executed their plan with careful coordination. Small groups lured individual SS officers into workshops or secluded areas, eliminating them quietly to avoid alerting the broader guard force. Once key targets were neutralized, prisoners armed themselves with confiscated weapons, improvised tools, and captured firearms. Simultaneously, a larger group prepared to breach the perimeter fences and flee into the surrounding forests. The operation required timing, courage, and discipline, reflecting months of careful preparation under the constant threat of discovery and death. The aftermath of the Sobibor uprising was both tragic and remarkable. Of approximately 600 prisoners, an estimated 300 managed to escape, though many were recaptured or killed in the following days. Around 50 to 70 are believed to have survived until the end of the war. These survivors provided crucial testimony about the inner workings of the camp, the methods of extermination, and the psychological manipulation employed by the Nazis. Their accounts revealed the human capacity for courage, collaboration, and defiance even in the most controlled and deadly environments. Treblinka, another site of Operation Reinhard, also witnessed resistance, though under slightly different circumstances. Prisoners smuggled tools, planned escapes, and attempted to disrupt killing operations. The Treblinka Revolt of August 1943 saw prisoners ignite buildings, destroy infrastructure, and flee into surrounding forests. Although many were killed during the escape or later recaptured, these acts demonstrated that even in a camp designed for maximum control, human ingenuity and bravery could challenge the Nazi system. The revolt also forced the Nazis to reassess security, indicating that resistance could have operational impacts even when partially unsuccessful. The psychological dimension of resistance in Reinhard camps was profound. Prisoners involved in uprisings experienced extreme fear, exhaustion, and trauma, yet the act of planning and executing rebellion provided a sense of purpose. In an environment designed to strip victims of identity, autonomy, and hope, resistance restored a measure of agency. Even unsuccessful attempts reinforced solidarity, courage, and the assertion of moral agency. These acts became a critical survival mechanism, not just physically but psychologically, as prisoners reclaimed a sense of control over their lives in a system determined to obliterate them. Resistance also underscored the importance of information and communication. Prisoners needed accurate knowledge of guard routines, camp layout, weapon locations, and potential escape routes. They developed secret communication networks, often at great personal risk, to share intelligence and coordinate activities. Information became a lifeline, allowing prisoners to act strategically rather than reactively. This element of resistance illustrates that survival often depended on mental acuity and collaboration as much as physical endurance. Local geography played a significant role in the success of uprisings. The forests and rural terrain surrounding Sobibor and Treblinka provided both cover and escape routes. Prisoners who managed to breach fences relied on their knowledge of the surrounding landscape, sometimes aided by sympathetic civilians or partisan groups. These external factors increased the probability of survival and underscored the interplay between internal resistance and external support networks. The environment became an active participant in the struggle, shaping the strategies and outcomes of escape attempts. Even the mere planning of uprisings had consequences for the Nazis. Awareness of potential resistance led to heightened security measures, increased surveillance, and procedural adjustments. This illustrates that resistance, however limited in scale, could disrupt operations and force the oppressors to divert resources and attention. The Nazis' need to respond to these threats demonstrates the tension between their desire for absolute control and the unpredictable resilience of human beings subjected to oppression. The uprisings within the Reinhard camps, therefore, were not merely isolated incidents of defiance. They were manifestations of strategic thinking, courage, collaboration, and moral resistance in the face of industrialized mass murder. These acts remind us that even in circumstances designed for total domination, the human spirit can assert itself through intelligence, bravery, and a relentless will to survive. Studying these revolts provides crucial insight into both the operational vulnerabilities of the Nazi system and the extraordinary resilience of those who endured it. In summary, resistance in the Reinhard camps illustrates that even amidst meticulously organized extermination, courage, planning, and solidarity enabled acts of defiance that challenged the Nazis' illusion of absolute control. Sobibor and Treblinka, those sites of immense tragedy, became symbols of human resilience, demonstrating that agency, hope, and moral courage could survive even in the most horrific circumstances. Chapter 11. The international and local response to Operation Reinhard. Operation Reinhard, despite its extreme secrecy and the Nazis' efforts to conceal the extent of their crimes, did not occur in complete isolation from the world. Both local populations in occupied Poland and international observers reacted in ways that ranged from complicity to resistance, from ignorance to horrified awareness. Examining these responses reveals how information, ideology, and fear shaped the broader environment in which the Holocaust unfolded, and how human behavior varied dramatically under conditions of terror. Locally, the populations living near Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka often witnessed aspects of the deportations without knowing the full reality of the extermination. Smoke rising from cremation pits, the sounds of gunfire or shouting, and the constant movement of trains carrying victims created a grim awareness that something extraordinary and disturbing was occurring. Some civilians, particularly in small towns and villages, were unable to fully comprehend what the camps entailed, interpreting the events as forced labor or resettlement actions. Others suspected that mass killings were taking place, though fear, indoctrination, and the severe penalties for intervention limited the ability of locals to act openly. Despite the pervasive fear, some individuals attempted to assist the victims. In rural areas, sympathetic farmers sometimes provided food, water, or guidance to escapees. Partisan groups operating in forests near the camps occasionally facilitated escapes, offered shelter, or transported fugitives to safer areas. These acts, though small in scale relative to the vast number of victims, demonstrate that localized resistance existed alongside the machinery of extermination. The risks were extreme, as anyone caught aiding Jews could face execution or imprisonment, yet courage and moral conviction led some to intervene regardless. Local authorities and collaborators also played complex roles. Some Polish officials and law enforcement personnel were coerced into assisting deportations, maintaining infrastructure, or providing logistical support. Others were motivated by ideology, personal gain, or anti-Semitic sentiment. This collaboration, whether voluntary or forced, enabled the Nazis to maintain operational efficiency, underscoring the tragic reality that genocide was not solely imposed from above, but facilitated through local participation. At the same time, individuals within these groups occasionally subverted orders or delayed operations, demonstrating the tension between complicity and resistance at the local level. Internationally, information about the atrocities being committed in the Reinhard camps trickled out through a combination of escapees, intelligence reports, and underground networks. Jewish organizations in Europe and abroad received reports from survivors who managed to flee ghettos or labor camps, providing fragmented but critical accounts of mass deportations and killings. These reports were often met with skepticism or disbelief, reflecting the difficulty of comprehending the scale and methodical nature of the Holocaust. Nonetheless, they gradually contributed to a growing awareness of the systematic extermination occurring in occupied Poland. Intelligence services, particularly from Britain and the United States, also intercepted reports that hinted at mass murder. Coded communications, such as those from the Polish underground and Jewish resistance networks, provided disturbing indications that millions of Jews were being deported and killed. However, these communications were often partial and difficult to verify. The Nazis' strict control over information, combined with the extraordinary scale of deception and secrecy, meant that many international actors could only speculate about the full extent of the atrocities. The lack of immediate, irrefutable evidence made widespread action or intervention challenging. Within occupied Europe, other resistance networks monitored and documented the situation. The Polish Home Army, Armia Krajowa, played a notable role in gathering intelligence and reporting on the movements of trains, ghetto roundups, and other indicators of extermination. Couriers and underground newspapers spread information as widely as possible, warning local populations and alerting the Allied powers. These efforts, though courageous, faced enormous limitations due to the Nazis' brutal suppression tactics, the constant threat of betrayal, and the logistical challenges of disseminating accurate information across occupied territories. Jewish councils and resistance within ghettos also attempted to communicate the scale of the threat to both local communities and international organizations. Leaders of the Warsaw, Lublin, and Lodz ghettos compiled reports on deportations, deaths, and the conditions in the camps, striving to alert the world despite limited channels and immense danger. These efforts illustrate the desperate attempts to overcome isolation and secrecy, demonstrating both courage and the tragic difficulty of influencing global perception in real time. The combination of local, national, and international responses reflects the complex interplay between knowledge, fear, and action. While many were paralyzed by uncertainty, terror, or disbelief, others acted decisively to document, resist, or assist victims. The fragmented awareness underscores how the Nazis' operational secrecy and propaganda enabled them to maintain an extraordinary level of control. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming terror, pockets of moral courage persisted, highlighting the human capacity for empathy, resistance, and solidarity under extreme conditions. Studying these responses provides crucial insight into the social, psychological, and logistical environment surrounding Operation Reinhard. Awareness of the camp's existence, even when incomplete or partial, influenced behavior, policy, and resistance strategies at multiple levels. It also demonstrates that the Holocaust was not only a product of centralized planning but interacted with complex networks of local populations, international observers, and underground movements. These interactions shaped both the execution of Reinhard and the historical record, leaving a legacy of testimony, moral reflection, and understanding of human behavior in extreme conditions. In summary, the local and international response to Operation Reinhard was marked by a mixture of fear, complicity, resistance, and limited intervention. Civilians, partisans, intelligence services, and resistance networks all played roles, small and large, in observing, documenting, or occasionally impeding the operation. While the sheer scale and secrecy of the extermination limited effective intervention, these responses underscore the interplay between information, perception, and action, revealing the broader human context in which Reinhard was carried out. While initial reports of mass killings in the Reinhard camps were often met with skepticism, the information that did reach the Allied powers gradually built a clearer picture of Nazi atrocities. The Polish underground played a pivotal role in documenting and transmitting these events. Couriers risked their lives to carry eyewitness accounts from ghettos, labor camps, and escapees to neutral or Allied territories. The reports, often detailed in nature, described the systematic deportation of Jews, the use of gas chambers, and the staggering scale of the extermination. Although incomplete, These documents represented a significant attempt to alert the world to one of history's most horrific campaigns. One of the most influential sources of information was the reports produced by the Polish government in exile, which compiled intelligence from various underground networks. These reports were transmitted to London, which served as a hub for disseminating information to the wider Allied leadership. They provided not only numbers but also qualitative descriptions of the Nazis' methods, including train logistics, camp layouts, and the psychological tactics used against prisoners. These reports were instrumental in shaping the understanding of the Holocaust among policymakers, even though immediate action was limited by strategic priorities and the broader demands of wartime operations. Jewish resistance organizations also contributed critical intelligence. Groups like the OB, Jewish Combat Organization, in Warsaw, along with smaller partisan units operating in forests near the camps, gathered first-hand testimony from escapees and deportees. They documented operational patterns, identified key personnel, and attempted to warn other ghettos about imminent deportations. Despite extreme danger, these networks maintained a fragile flow of information, ensuring that news of Reinhard's atrocities reached beyond the immediate victims. Their efforts highlight both the courage and resourcefulness of those attempting to resist extermination from within. The international press, although constrained by limited information and wartime censorship, occasionally published reports that hinted at the scale of Nazi genocide. Stories from refugees, diplomatic channels, and intercepted communications reached newspapers in Britain, the United States, and neutral countries. However, the fragmented nature of the reports, combined with the unprecedented scale and horror of the crimes, made many readers skeptical. The idea that an entire population could be systematically exterminated using industrial methods was so extreme that even well-informed journalists sometimes struggled to convey the reality accurately. Allied governments faced practical and moral limitations in responding to these reports. While there was a growing awareness of mass murder, military priorities often took precedence. The focus remained on defeating Nazi Germany through conventional military operations, with less immediate capacity for targeted interventions in occupied territories. Air raids, for example, could disrupt transportation but were rarely precise enough to affect the operation of extermination camps without risking massive civilian casualties. In addition, the sheer scale of Reinhard, combined with the Nazis' operational secrecy, meant that direct intervention was extraordinarily difficult. Within occupied Poland, local populations had varied responses to the events unfolding around them. Fear of retribution dominated daily life, and assisting Jews could lead to execution or deportation. Yet many individuals found ways to provide small acts of aid. Farmers sometimes hid escapees, villagers provided food or clothing, and partisan groups offered temporary sanctuary. These acts were not only morally courageous but strategically significant, as they allowed some victims to survive long enough to bear witness and document the horrors of Reinhard. Even these limited interventions created ripples that challenged the Nazi perception of total control. Collaboration with the Nazis also influenced local responses. While some officials were coerced, others participated voluntarily due to ideological alignment, anti-Semitism, or the promise of personal gain. Police units, administrators, and auxiliary forces sometimes assisted with deportations, surveillance, and maintaining the camps. This collaboration highlights the moral complexity of occupied societies, where fear, coercion, and opportunism intersected with ethical choice. Even within these constraints, however, instances of defiance emerged, reflecting a spectrum of human behavior under extreme oppression. The cumulative effect of local and international responses, while insufficient to halt Reinhard, shaped the broader historical record. Eyewitness testimonies, partisan reports, and intelligence dispatches have become critical sources for understanding the operation, its methods, and its impact. These accounts also provide insight into the psychological and social environment surrounding the camps, revealing how fear, moral choice, and survival instincts influence behavior. Moreover, the documentation and testimony gathered during Reinhard laid the groundwork for post-war justice and historical study. Survivor accounts, partisan records, and Allied intelligence were later used to reconstruct the scope of the genocide, identify perpetrators, and provide evidence during trials such as Nuremberg. Without these local and international efforts, even fragmentary as they were, much of the operational detail of Reinhard might have remained unknown. The courage to observe, record, and communicate under extreme risk ensured that the atrocities could not be completely hidden from history. In conclusion, the international and local response to Operation Reinhard was a complex interplay of awareness, fear, moral courage, and practical limitation. While the Nazis achieved near-total operational control, local sympathizers, partisan groups, Jewish resistance organizations, and intelligence services contributed to documenting the crimes, assisting escapees, and challenging the system in subtle but meaningful ways. These responses provide critical insight into the human context of Reinhard, illustrating how individuals and groups navigated the tension between survival, morality, and action in one of history's darkest periods. Chapter 12. The Logistics and Infrastructure of Mass Murder in Reinhard. Operation Reinhard was not only a campaign of terror and murder but also a highly organized logistical enterprise. The Nazis transformed the extermination of millions into a system of industrial efficiency, demonstrating the horrifying intersection of bureaucracy, engineering, and ideology. Understanding the logistics behind Reinhard reveals how meticulous planning, infrastructure, and coordination enabled mass killing on a scale previously unimaginable. It also underscores the chilling reality that genocide, while fueled by hatred, relied heavily on administrative precision and operational efficiency. The heart of Reinhard's logistics was the transportation network. Victims were deported from ghettos and transit camps across Poland, primarily via the railway system, which the Nazis adapted for the purposes of extermination. Trains were scheduled meticulously to maximize throughput and minimize delays. Freight cars, often sealed and overcrowded, were used to transport hundreds of people at a time. These trains functioned as the first stage in the extermination process, with careful coordination ensuring that arrivals at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka occurred on schedule, preventing bottlenecks that could disrupt the operation. The use of the rail network required careful coordination with the Reichsbahn, the German National Railway. Timetables, cargo assignments, and routing instructions were meticulously calculated. Even small delays could have cascading effects, potentially causing chaos at the camps. Deportation trains were often disguised under the guise of labor or resettlement movements, a measure designed to reduce panic and ensure compliance among victims. This interplay of deception and logistics was central to the operation's effectiveness, reflecting how bureaucratic planning was harnessed to facilitate genocide. Once victims arrived at the camps, infrastructure was designed to streamline the process of extermination. Arrival zones, undressing facilities, storage areas, and gas chambers were arranged to maximize efficiency while maintaining secrecy. Paths were deliberately constructed to minimize sightlines of corpses and cremation areas, reducing panic and preserving operational flow. Camp layouts were designed with precision, ensuring that large numbers of victims could be processed daily without interruption. Guards and staff were positioned strategically to control movement, enforce compliance, and prevent resistance. Belzec, the first of the Reinhard camps, exemplifies the logistical sophistication of the operation. Built with a combination of temporary structures and concealed gas chambers, it was designed for maximum throughput. Victims arrived, were separated by gender and age, guided through deceptive facilities, and ultimately murdered in gas chambers disguised as showers. Bodies were then disposed of through burial pits or cremation, with disposal methods refined over time to increase speed and efficiency. The infrastructure combined deception, speed, and technical precision in a system designed to process thousands of victims daily. Sobibor, similarly, reflected careful planning in both physical design and operational workflow. Arrival zones were controlled by gates and fences, while paths led victims through buildings that masked their true purpose. The gas chambers were equipped to handle large numbers of people simultaneously, and corpse disposal areas were located strategically to prevent detection by new arrivals. These designs, combined with strict schedules, allowed Sobibor to function as a lethal production line, with minimal disruption and maximum output. Trains, camp layouts, and personnel coordination were only part of the logistical puzzle. Reinhard also relied on a highly structured administrative system. Detailed records, reports, and telegrams documented deportations, arrivals, and deaths. The infamous Hofel telegram, for instance, provided precise numbers of victims processed through each camp. Such documentation served multiple purposes: maintaining bureaucratic oversight, demonstrating operational success to higher authorities, and enabling continuous refinement of processes. The Nazis' obsession with record-keeping turned murder into a calculable, organized enterprise. Staffing was another critical component of logistics. The camps relied on a combination of German SS officers, Tranicki auxiliaries, and local collaborators. Each individual had assigned duties, from managing train arrivals and guiding victims to operating gas chambers and handling corpses. Tasks were divided with precision, ensuring that all aspects of the killing process functioned simultaneously. Staff training emphasized both technical efficiency and psychological detachment, ensuring that personnel could execute their roles without hesitation or moral interference. Even basic necessities for staff, such as food, fuel, and equipment, were incorporated into the logistical framework. Maintaining operational efficiency required that personnel be able to perform their tasks without interruption. Supplies were delivered in coordination with broader Nazi supply chains, reflecting the industrial approach to mass murder. This attention to the smallest details illustrates the horrifying level of organization underpinning Reinhard, where every resource, human and material, was directed toward one objective: extermination. The camp's infrastructure also integrated security measures to prevent escape and maintain secrecy. Fences, watchtowers, patrols, and dogs created controlled environments in which victims had little opportunity for defiance. Surveillance was continuous, with SS officers and auxiliaries monitoring every movement. Even minor deviations were met with immediate and often lethal consequences, reinforcing operational discipline. Security measures were inseparable from the logistical framework, as any disruption could slow or halt the killing process. In essence, Operation Reinhard functioned like a carefully engineered industrial machine. The combination of transportation planning, camp infrastructure, administrative oversight, personnel coordination, and security measures ensured that millions of victims could be exterminated with horrifying efficiency. The logistics of Reinhard reveal the chilling intersection of human cruelty, bureaucratic competence, and technological organization. By studying this system, we gain insight not only into the mechanics of genocide but also into the calculated precision that allowed such crimes to be carried out at scale. Beyond train schedules, camp layouts, and personnel coordination, The Reinhard camps incorporated a disturbing level of industrial precision in handling corpses and maintaining continuous killing operations. Disposal of the dead was a central logistical concern, designed to prevent disease, minimize odor, and maintain secrecy while allowing the operation to continue uninterrupted. Initially, burial pits were used at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Victims were stacked systematically, sometimes in layers and covered with earth. While this method temporarily contained the problem, it was inefficient for long-term operations, as decomposition could lead to ground contamination, disease, and exposure of atrocities to nearby populations. Recognizing these limitations, the Nazis innovated methods of corpse disposal to increase speed and efficiency. Cremation, using both open-air pyres and eventually improvised crematoria, became a core component of the Reinhard infrastructure. At Treblinka, for example, prisoners were forced to construct large pyres and fuel them continuously to handle the immense volume of bodies. Open-air burning, while horrific, allowed the Nazis to process thousands of corpses daily, reducing the risk of disease and concealing evidence from arriving victims. This focus on industrial-scale corpse management reflects the chilling integration of logistics and mass murder. The physical layout of disposal areas was designed for efficiency and secrecy. Burial pits were located at a distance from the main processing zones, but within the camp perimeter for easy access by Sonderkommandos. Paths were constructed to allow corpses to be moved quickly from gas chambers to pits or pyres, with minimal visibility to new arrivals. These pathways and zones were carefully planned to prevent panic, maintain operational flow, and reduce resistance. Even the positioning of guards and fences in disposal areas was strategic, ensuring that the processes of death and corpse handling remained hidden while functioning as a continuous assembly line of extermination. Labor organization played a critical role in corpse management. Sonderkommandos, mostly Jewish prisoners forced to perform the most gruesome tasks, were divided into specialized teams. Some handled the removal of bodies from gas chambers, others managed burial or burning, and others maintained equipment or transported fuel. This division of labor ensured that all elements of the disposal process worked simultaneously, minimizing downtime and increasing the capacity for daily killings. Despite the extreme psychological toll, these forced laborers were indispensable to the operational efficiency of Reinhard. Logistical efficiency also extended to the supply of fuel and materials. Large quantities of wood, petrol, and other combustibles were delivered to maintain pyres and improvised crematoria. Coordination with local suppliers, transport networks, and SS logistics offices ensured that operations could continue without interruption. Even minor delays in fuel delivery could slow the disposal process, potentially creating security risks or health hazards. This level of detail underscores the horrifying reality that Reinhard functioned like a factory, with each component, transport, labor, fuel, and infrastructure integrated into a single lethal system. The management of personal belongings confiscated from victims was another aspect of logistical planning. Property such as clothing, shoes, jewelry, and valuables was collected systematically. Items were sorted, stored, and transported to warehouses for redistribution or sale within the Nazi economy. This process added a further layer of organization, turning the extermination process into a fully integrated operation that extended beyond killing to the appropriation of resources. Even in the context of genocide, the Nazis maintained a bureaucratic focus on efficiency, profit, and resource management. Deception continued to be a key element of logistics. The Nazis designed undressing areas, paths to gas chambers, and signs to create the illusion of showers or medical examinations. By minimizing panic and confusion, these deceptive measures allowed the killing process to operate smoothly. Victims were often unaware of the fate awaiting them until the final moments, reducing the likelihood of resistance and facilitating operational continuity. The integration of psychological manipulation into logistical planning demonstrates the chilling sophistication of Reinhard. Security measures complemented logistical planning, ensuring that escape, disruption, or rebellion could be minimized. Watchtowers, fences, armed guards, and dogs were strategically placed to monitor every movement. Patrol routines were meticulously scheduled, and any sign of disobedience was met with immediate execution. The combination of lethal force and strict operational protocols ensured that the system could function as intended. Security and logistics were inseparable. The effectiveness of one depended on the precision of the other. Medical and administrative supervision further enhanced efficiency. SS officers and technical experts continuously evaluated procedures, seeking ways to increase throughput or improve disposal methods. Innovations such as optimized pyre arrangements or improved gas chamber designs were implemented swiftly. Reports were filed and transmitted to higher authorities, reflecting the bureaucratic oversight that characterized Reinhard. This constant drive for improvement, even in the context of murder, illustrates the industrial mindset applied to genocide. In essence, the logistics and infrastructure of Operation Reinhard transformed mass murder into a deadly, highly organized system. Transportation networks, camp layouts, labor divisions, corpse disposal methods, and resource management all function together to create an industrial-scale killing machine. Understanding these mechanisms highlights the terrifying combination of human cruelty, technical planning, and bureaucratic efficiency that enabled one of history's most lethal operations. The meticulous integration of logistics, deception, and security ensured that Reinhard operated with horrifying precision, leaving a chilling testament to the systematic nature of the Holocaust. Chapter 13. The Role of Technology and Innovation in Reinhard. Operation Reinhard represents one of history's most chilling examples of how technological innovation and practical engineering were harnessed to facilitate systematic mass murder. The Nazis approached genocide not only as an ideological project but as a technical and operational challenge, seeking ways to maximize efficiency, speed, and secrecy. Examining the role of technology in Reinhard illuminates the horrifying integration of human ingenuity with cruelty and provides insight into how industrial methods were applied to extermination on an unprecedented scale. One of the most significant innovations in Reinhard was the adaptation of gas chambers. While the Nazis had prior experience with the T4 euthanasia program, which used carbon monoxide to kill the disabled, Reinhard camps implemented gas chambers on a larger and more methodical scale. Engineers and SS officers collaborated to design chambers that could accommodate dozens, and eventually hundreds, of victims simultaneously. These chambers were disguised as showers or delousing facilities, utilizing deception to reduce panic and maintain operational flow. The design of the chambers reflects a horrifying attention to both psychological manipulation and technical efficiency. The use of carbon monoxide generated by engine exhaust was a core technological adaptation. Diesel or gasoline engines were modified to redirect exhaust into sealed chambers, allowing mass killings to occur quickly and without direct physical contact between perpetrators and victims. This method was chosen for its relative simplicity, cost-effectiveness, and lethality. The integration of mechanical engineering, fuel management, and spatial design enabled Reinhard camps to process victims with a speed that was both methodical and terrifyingly efficient. Transportation technology also played a critical role. The German railway system was meticulously coordinated to ensure that trains arrived on schedule at the extermination camps. Rail cars were repurposed to transport hundreds of victims in overcrowded conditions, and timetables were synchronized with camp operations to prevent bottlenecks. This logistical innovation, essentially a mobile conveyor system, demonstrates the use of existing infrastructure to facilitate genocide on an industrial scale. Even the simplest components of technology, such as trains, became tools in a highly organized killing machine. Administrative technology was another key aspect. Detailed record-keeping, coding systems, and communication protocols allowed SS leadership to monitor deportations, report on daily kills, and manage resources efficiently. The hopeful telegram, for example, provided precise numbers of victims sent to each Reinhard camp, illustrating how bureaucratic and technological systems were intertwined with the machinery of death. These methods allowed Nazi leadership to exert centralized control while simultaneously enabling local commanders to optimize operations based on real-time data. Innovation extended to corpse disposal as well. Methods of burning, layering, and managing the remains of victims evolved as the camps operated. At Treblinka, prisoners were forced to construct massive pyres with continuous fuel feeding, allowing for the rapid incineration of thousands of bodies. This required precise understanding of combustion, airflow, and material handling, highlighting the intersection of technical knowledge and industrial-scale murder. Even in corpse management, the Nazis sought efficiency, demonstrating that innovation was not limited to killing but extended to the processing and disposal of evidence. Mechanical devices were also employed in the organization and management of labor. Prisoners, forced to handle bodies, transport materials, and maintain infrastructure, were organized using assembly line principles. Tools, carts, pulleys, and rails were deployed to move corpses quickly from gas chambers to burial pits or cremation sites. These technological aids increased throughput, reduced physical strain on the forced laborers, and allowed operations to proceed uninterrupted. The camps effectively functioned as factories of death, with mechanical and human labor integrated seamlessly. Even security technology was adapted for operational efficiency. Watchtowers, barbed wire fences, floodlights, and guard patrols were positioned using precise spatial planning. Observation points were placed strategically to minimize blind spots, and communication systems ensured that guards could respond immediately to any attempt at escape. Dogs, signals, and alarm mechanisms were used to detect and suppress resistance. The combination of mechanical, human, and psychological surveillance created an environment in which escape and disruption were exceedingly difficult. Chemical and physical engineering innovations also played a role. The Nazis experimented with methods to accelerate decomposition, reduce odor, and improve the functionality of pyres. These efforts were driven by a desire to maintain secrecy and operational continuity, reflecting a pragmatic application of scientific principles to an utterly immoral purpose. Every improvement, no matter how technical, contributed to the efficiency of the killing process and the concealment of evidence from incoming victims and outsiders. Training and technical instruction for staff reflected the integration of technology into daily operations. Personnel learned how to operate gas engines, manage cremation pyres, and coordinate logistical flows. Even auxiliary forces were taught how to maintain machinery, move corpses efficiently, and execute operations without interruption. This emphasis on technical competence demonstrates how the Nazis combined ideology with practical skills, ensuring that each element of Reinhard functioned like a precise, deadly machine. In essence, technology and innovation were inseparable from the horror of Reinhard. Gas chambers, transport systems, administrative record-keeping, corpse disposal methods, and mechanical aids all contributed to an unprecedented level of operational efficiency. These technological adaptations allowed the Nazis to implement genocide on an industrial scale, combining human ingenuity with calculated cruelty. Studying these innovations provides insight not only into the mechanics of Reinhard but also into the terrifying capability of organized systems to apply knowledge and engineering toward destructive ends. The technological innovations in Operation Reinhard were not limited to large-scale machinery or transportation systems. They extended into every facet of camp operations, making the process of mass murder disturbingly efficient and methodical. One critical innovation involved the layout and internal design of the camps, which combined engineering principles with psychological manipulation. Buildings, pathways, fences, and gates were carefully planned to optimize the flow of victims, while concealing the true purpose of each area. Arrival zones led to undressing facilities designed to mimic showers or medical check-ins, reducing panic and allowing victims to be moved efficiently toward gas chambers. Even the placement of barriers and signage was part of an operational strategy to maintain order while increasing the speed of extermination. Another technological adaptation was the refinement of gas chamber mechanics. While early methods relied on rudimentary carbon monoxide systems, Reinhard camps improved efficiency through modifications to engines and exhaust systems. In some cases, diesel engines were adapted to deliver a steady flow of lethal gas, and chamber design was optimized to minimize ventilation issues and ensure rapid deaths. Engineers carefully calculated chamber size, capacity, and sealing mechanisms to process the maximum number of victims safely from the Nazis' perspective. This reflects a terrifying blend of technical ingenuity and moral detachment, where the principles of engineering were applied solely to increase the lethality of mass killing. Corpse disposal was another area of systematic innovation. Open-air pyres required precise understanding of fuel ratios, airflow, and layering techniques to maintain continuous burning. At Treblinka, prisoners were forced to construct multiple pyres simultaneously, allowing corpses to be burned quickly and efficiently. Over time, the methods evolved to reduce smoke visibility and odor, reflecting a combination of practical engineering and operational secrecy. Even burial pits were optimized, with corpses stacked in ways that conserved space and facilitated eventual burning or incineration, demonstrating a horrifying efficiency in handling human remains. Logistics software might not have existed in the modern sense, but Reinhard operated as a highly organized information system. Daily records were meticulously kept, documenting arrivals, departures, and deaths with bureaucratic precision. The hopeful telegram, for instance, listed exact numbers of victims transported to each camp, allowing SS leadership to monitor operations, allocate resources, and refine processes. Administrative technology also ensured that supplies, labor, and security personnel were coordinated seamlessly, highlighting the horrifying precision with which human lives were reduced to numbers and data points. Even small mechanical innovations had operational significance. Carts, pulleys, and rails were used to transport corpses quickly from gas chambers to disposal sites, reducing labor fatigue and speeding the process. Simple mechanical aids, when combined with forced labor, functioned as extensions of the overall system, demonstrating that even minor tools played a critical role in the industrialization of death. This integration of human and mechanical labor illustrates the meticulous planning behind Reinhard, where every component, no matter how small, contributed to operational efficiency. Transportation technology itself evolved to suit the genocidal goals of Reinhard. Trains carrying victims were meticulously scheduled to arrive in coordinated waves, with rail networks synchronized to ensure that arrivals matched the processing capacity of the camps. Overcrowding in rail cars, although horrific for the victims, was calculated to maximize throughput, demonstrating the combination of logistical planning and cruelty. Schedules, routing, and timetables were maintained with military precision, reflecting the chilling alignment of railway engineering with genocidal objectives. The Nazis also exploited chemical and material innovations to facilitate camp operations. Disinfectants, lime, and other chemicals were used in attempts to control disease and maintain operational continuity. Gas chamber operations required careful monitoring of chemical flow, engine performance, and sealing techniques to ensure lethal effectiveness. Fuel management for cremation pyres was optimized through both empirical observation and engineering reasoning. In every case, technological and chemical knowledge was applied toward efficiency, concealment, and continuity of mass murder. Security technology complemented operational innovations. Watchtowers, floodlights, guard patrols, and alarm systems were integrated to detect any attempted escapes or resistance. Surveillance was systematic and constant, often augmented by dogs, human spotters, and signaling systems. Escape routes were monitored, barriers were strategically placed, and rapid response procedures were implemented to suppress uprisings. This combination of technological, mechanical, and human oversight created an environment in which disruption was extremely difficult, further enhancing the operational efficiency of Reinhard. Training programs reflected the technical sophistication of the camps. SS officers, Traniki auxiliaries, and other personnel received instruction in operating engines, managing disposal systems, and maintaining security protocols. This emphasis on technical competency ensured that human labor complemented the broader technological infrastructure, allowing the camps to function as coordinated systems rather than merely as sites of ad hoc killing. Every component, human, mechanical, or chemical, was integrated into a lethal operational framework. In conclusion, the technological and innovative aspects of Operation Reinhard highlight the terrifying fusion of human ingenuity, engineering principles, and ideological extremism. Gas chambers, transportation systems, record-keeping, disposal methods, mechanical aids, chemical applications, and security technologies all function together to create a highly efficient system of industrialized murder. By studying these innovations, we gain a sobering understanding of how technology, when divorced from ethics and combined with totalitarian ideology, can become a tool of unimaginable destruction. Operation Reinhard demonstrates that innovation itself is neutral. It is human purpose that determines whether ingenuity serves life or death. Chapter 14, Post-War Trials, Accountability, and Legacy of Operation Reinhard. The conclusion of World War II did not immediately erase the horrors of Operation Reinhard, nor did it bring swift justice to the architects and perpetrators of this meticulously organized genocide. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, survivors, investigators, and Allied authorities faced the enormous task of documenting crimes, identifying perpetrators, and establishing mechanisms of accountability. The post-war trials of Reinhardt's personnel, the broader pursuit of justice, and the historical legacy of the operation reveal the challenges of confronting industrialized atrocity and preserving memory for future generations. The first challenge was locating the key perpetrators. Many Reinhardt officers, including high-ranking SS officials and Traniki auxiliaries, had attempted to disappear or reintegrate into post-war societies under false identities. The destruction of evidence, combined with the chaotic post-war environment, made identification and prosecution difficult. Investigators relied heavily on survivor testimony, captured documents, photographs, and intelligence from Allied occupation forces. Detailed records from the camps, including transport logs, lists of personnel, and administrative correspondence, were crucial in reconstructing the chain of command and linking specific individuals to crimes. Among the most prominent figures held accountable was Franz Stangl, commandant of Sobibor and Treblinka. Stangl was captured in Brazil in 1967, decades after the war ended, and extradited to West Germany for trial. He faced charges for his role in organizing mass killings and overseeing the industrialized execution of tens of thousands of Jews. During his trial, Stengel's defense relied on bureaucratic detachment and claims of following orders, yet survivors' testimony, detailed camp documentation, and evidence of his active role in planning and executing operations left little doubt of his culpability. The trial highlighted not only individual responsibility but also the systematic nature of Reinhard, demonstrating how meticulous planning and technical oversight were inseparable from moral accountability. Other trials, such as those of Treblinka personnel in the early 1960s, further emphasized the collective responsibility of Reinhard's staff. These proceedings included both German SS officers and auxiliaries recruited from occupied territories. Witnesses recounted the processes of deportation, gas chamber operation, and corpse disposal, offering detailed insight into the daily mechanics of mass murder. Even lower-ranking personnel could not claim ignorance, as each task they performed directly facilitated extermination. These trials reinforced the principle that participation, however bureaucratically mediated, constituted complicity in crimes against humanity. Challenges in prosecution often stemmed from the sheer scale and complexity of Reinhard. Unlike a single battlefield atrocity, the operation involved multiple camps, thousands of victims, and intricate administrative and logistical networks. Establishing direct responsibility required painstaking reconstruction of events, often decades after the fact. Many perpetrators had escaped detection, fled abroad, or benefited from post-war bureaucratic chaos. This complexity meant that while some high-ranking officers were tried, numerous others evaded justice entirely, leaving a partial but significant record of accountability. The Nuremberg trials, though focused primarily on top Nazi leaders and military officials, laid the groundwork for later Reinhard prosecutions. Legal frameworks established during Nuremberg defined crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide, providing prosecutors with the necessary instruments to pursue Reinhard personnel. These trials set critical precedents in international law, establishing that systematic extermination, even when executed under bureaucratic procedures and concealed from public view, constituted criminal conduct on a universal scale. Survivor testimony became the most powerful evidence in post-war trials. Individuals who had escaped Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec recounted the arrival procedures, gas chamber operations, forced labor, and corpse disposal practices. These first-hand accounts provided both factual clarity and moral weight, documenting not only actions but the lived experience of victims. Testimony revealed the calculated efficiency of Reinhard, the technological adaptations, and the human suffering inflicted daily. In many cases, survivors' courage in recounting these events decades later made the difference between successful prosecution and impunity. The legacy of Reinhard trials extends beyond legal accountability. They serve as crucial historical records, preserving detailed knowledge of the operation's methods, scale, and impact. Documentation from trials, including transport logs, administrative orders, engineering diagrams of gas chambers, and photographs, remains invaluable to historians, educators, and memorial institutions. By maintaining an accurate record, these proceedings ensure that the systematic nature of Reinhard is understood and remembered, providing future generations with insight into how bureaucracy, technology, and ideology can be weaponized for mass murder. The trials also highlighted moral and ethical lessons. Questions about obedience, complicity, and the human capacity for cruelty became central topics in both legal and philosophical discourse. Judges, prosecutors, and historians grappled with understanding how ordinary individuals, operating within administrative structures, could contribute to genocide. Reinhard became a case study in the dangers of uncritical compliance, ideological fanaticism, and the detachment of morality from technical or bureaucratic work. In addition, the trials underscored the importance of international cooperation. Many perpetrators fled abroad, necessitating collaboration between multiple governments, intelligence agencies, and law enforcement bodies. Extradition, surveillance, and diplomatic negotiation became essential in bringing individuals like Stengel to justice. The pursuit of Reinhard personnel demonstrated that accountability for crimes against humanity required sustained effort across decades and borders, reinforcing the principle that genocide could not remain hidden indefinitely. In summary, the post-war trials and accountability processes for Operation Reinhard reveal the complex interplay of law, morality, history, and justice. While not all perpetrators were punished, the efforts to document crimes, prosecute offenders, and preserve memory created a legacy that extends far beyond legal verdicts. These trials provided insight into the industrialized nature of Reinhard, the human roles in facilitating genocide, and the moral imperatives of witnessing, recording, and confronting atrocity. By examining these proceedings, we understand both the challenges and the necessity of pursuing justice in the aftermath of systematic mass murder. While the prosecution of high-ranking Reinhard personnel marked significant milestones in post-war justice, many perpetrators escaped accountability, highlighting the limitations and challenges of legal systems in the immediate aftermath of genocide. Numerous SS officers and Traniki auxiliaries managed to reintegrate into post-war society under false identities, living quietly in Europe, South America, or the Middle East. Some even gained employment in government, business, or academic positions, shielded by bureaucratic loopholes, insufficient documentation, or the post-war chaos that distracted authorities from pursuing every individual involved. This reality left many survivors with a profound sense of injustice, reinforcing the idea that legal redress was only partially attainable despite extensive efforts. Nevertheless, survivor testimony and historical research eventually brought several previously hidden perpetrators to light. Intensive investigations by organizations such as the Simon Wiesenthal Center and national prosecutors gradually tracked fugitives, often using archival documents, wartime correspondence, and tips from the public. One striking example is Gustav Wagner, a deputy at Sobibor who was located in Brazil in the 1970s. While the legal outcome was limited due to his death before trial, the effort to uncover his identity underscores the persistence required to confront the aftermath of Reinhard and the moral imperative to pursue justice, even decades later. The broader historical legacy of Reinhard has been shaped by both trials and scholarly research. Detailed reconstructions of camp operations, transport logistics, and personnel hierarchies have allowed historians to understand the industrialized nature of the genocide. Sites such as Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec have been extensively studied and memorialized, ensuring that the operational details of Reinhard are preserved alongside the human stories of suffering and resistance. Memorials, museums, and educational programs provide not only remembrance but also analysis, helping society understand how ideology, technology, and bureaucracy combine to facilitate mass murder. Memorialization has also focused on human resilience and moral courage. Commemorative efforts honor both the victims and the few survivors who resisted or escaped, emphasizing the personal stories that persisted despite overwhelming odds. Sobibor's memorial, for example, includes testimonies, artifacts, and accounts of the uprising, highlighting not only the systematic murder but also the extraordinary courage of those who resisted. These memorials serve as spaces of reflection, providing visitors with an immersive understanding of both the industrialized scale of Reinhard and the individual experiences within it. The trials and historical investigations also fostered broader discussions on the nature of culpability. Reinhard, with its reliance on bureaucratic systems and technological innovations, raised questions about the moral responsibility of individuals operating within hierarchical structures. How much responsibility lies with those who execute orders versus those who plan and innovate? Can technical expertise be morally neutral when applied to killing? These questions remain central in legal, philosophical, and sociological debates, emphasizing that Reinhard is not only a historical case study but also a continuing lens through which to examine human ethics, obedience, and institutional complicity. International law, shaped in part by post-war Reinhard prosecutions, established critical principles for addressing crimes against humanity. The trials reinforced the idea that systematic genocide constitutes an offense not only against direct victims but against humanity as a whole. Reinhard's trials demonstrated that legal systems could extend accountability across national boundaries and decades, offering a template for later tribunals, such as those for Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. This legal legacy ensures that Operation Reinhard continues to inform the development of international criminal law and the pursuit of justice in contemporary conflicts. Education has become another key component of Reinhard's legacy. Schools, universities, and Holocaust education centers worldwide incorporate detailed studies of Reinhard into curricula, emphasizing both the operational mechanisms of genocide and the human stories behind them. Survivors' testimonies, archival documents, and scholarly research combine to provide a comprehensive picture, ensuring that the lessons of Reinhard are transmitted to new generations. By understanding the intersection of ideology, logistics, and human behavior, students and researchers gain insight into the conditions that allow such atrocities to occur and the moral responsibilities of individuals and societies. The unpunished perpetrators, while a tragic reality, also emphasize the importance of ongoing vigilance. Reinhard illustrates how crimes can extend beyond the immediate moment of execution, requiring decades-long efforts to pursue justice, record history, and honor victims. Continuous research, documentation, and public engagement are essential to ensure that the full scope of Reinhard's atrocities is acknowledged and that attempts to deny, obscure, or minimize the crimes are countered with evidence and education. Finally, the enduring legacy of Operation Reinhard lies in its capacity to teach about the dangers of dehumanization, bureaucratic obedience, and technological misuse. The operation demonstrates that genocide is not only an act of ideological hatred, but also a meticulously planned, highly organized process that relies on the complicity, expertise, and coordination of many individuals. By studying the trials, memorials, and historical reconstructions, society gains a sobering reminder of the moral, legal, and educational imperatives to prevent similar atrocities in the future. Reinhard's legacy is both a cautionary tale and a call to uphold justice, human dignity, and vigilance against the machinery of oppression. In conclusion, while post-war trials achieved partial justice, Operation Reinhard's legacy extends far beyond courtrooms. The documentation, memorialization, and scholarship surrounding the camps preserve knowledge of both the industrialized nature of genocide and the human experiences within it. Lessons drawn from Reinhard inform international law, education, and ethical reflection, ensuring that the horrors of the Holocaust continue to teach, caution, and guide humanity. Chapter 15. Historical Lessons, Memory, and the Enduring Impact of Operation Reinhard. Operation Reinhard, as the most lethal and systematically organized phase of the Holocaust, leaves behind lessons that extend far beyond history books. Its legacy is not simply the record of mass murder but a study in human behavior, societal structures, and the consequences of ideology combined with technology and bureaucracy. Reflecting on Reinhard provides profound insights into how ordinary systems can be transformed into instruments of extraordinary cruelty, and how humanity can strive to remember, prevent, and learn from such horrors. One of the clearest lessons of Reinhard lies in the danger of dehumanization. The Nazis' approach to Jews in occupied Poland transformed millions of human beings into numbers, objects, and logistical challenges. Administrative memos, transport lists, and operational diagrams stripped individuals of identity, rendering them mere data points in a vast extermination system. This mechanization of human life highlights the importance of maintaining empathy, moral awareness, and ethical frameworks, even within bureaucratic or technological systems. Reinhard reminds us that reducing people to categories or statistics can facilitate unimaginable cruelty. The role of ideology in enabling genocide is another critical lesson. Reinhard did not occur spontaneously. It was rooted in deeply entrenched anti-Semitic beliefs and Nazi racial theory. Ideology provided the moral justification, motivating individuals to carry out acts that might otherwise have been inconceivable. The operation demonstrates how belief systems, when coupled with authority, propaganda, and societal compliance, can overcome moral restraint. Studying Reinhard reinforces the importance of questioning dogma, challenging prejudice, and promoting critical thinking to prevent the emergence of similar ideologies in any society. Bureaucracy and technological efficiency played a central role in Reinhard's effectiveness. The Nazis applied organizational principles, engineering techniques, and administrative precision to orchestrate mass murder on an unprecedented scale. From train schedules to gas chamber engineering, from corpse disposal to record-keeping, every aspect of the operation was carefully calculated. This chilling industrialization of genocide provides a sobering insight. Efficiency and innovation are morally neutral tools that can be directed toward life-saving or life-destroying ends. Reinhard warns against the uncritical application of technology and organization without ethical oversight. Memory and documentation emerge as crucial counterforces to genocide. Despite attempts to erase evidence, survivors, underground networks, and post-war investigators preserved records, testimonies, and artifacts that have allowed Reinhard to be studied and understood. These materials ensure that future generations can comprehend both the scale and the mechanics of the operation. Reinhard teaches the enduring importance of recording events, bearing witness, and creating archives, not only for legal justice but also for historical knowledge and collective memory. Without meticulous documentation, many aspects of Reinhard might have remained obscured, demonstrating the power of information as a tool of remembrance and accountability. The moral complexity faced by those involved in Reinhard also offers lessons. Individuals ranged from perpetrators to forced laborers, collaborators, and witnesses, each navigating a landscape of extreme coercion, ideological pressure, and fear. While some participated willingly, others were constrained by circumstance or terror, highlighting the difficult interplay between choice and compulsion. Studying these roles encourages reflection on personal responsibility, ethical decision-making, and the consequences of actions, particularly in situations of extreme social or political pressure. Reinhard serves as a stark reminder that morality cannot be outsourced to bureaucracy or authority. Individuals must retain a sense of ethical agency even under duress. Education is another enduring impact of Reinhard. Memorials, museums, and Holocaust education programs worldwide use detailed studies of Reinhard to teach not only the history of the Holocaust but also broader lessons in ethics, civics, and human rights. Visitors learn about logistics, technology, and administration not to glorify efficiency but to understand the mechanisms that made genocide possible. By engaging with these lessons, students and the public gain critical awareness of how societal structures, propaganda, and technology can be manipulated toward destructive ends, and how vigilance is necessary to prevent similar atrocities in the future. The trials and post-war prosecutions of Reinhard personnel highlight the importance of accountability. Although many perpetrators escaped justice, those who were tried demonstrated that crimes against humanity can be investigated and prosecuted, even decades later. The persistence of legal systems in tracking fugitives, analyzing evidence, and securing convictions reinforces the principle that systematic atrocities cannot go unchallenged. This legal legacy extends beyond Reinhard, influencing international law and informing responses to contemporary acts of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Resistance, both organized and individual, also forms a key component of Reinhard's legacy. Even within extreme conditions of fear, repression, and logistical control, some victims, partisans, and sympathetic locals found ways to act, save lives, or document events. The existence of these acts of courage illustrates the capacity for human agency, moral choice, and defiance, even against overwhelming odds. Reinhard demonstrates that while the machinery of genocide is powerful, human resilience, courage, and empathy persist as counterforces, offering hope and guidance for future generations. The global awareness generated by Reinhard's study emphasizes that historical memory is a shared responsibility. Nations, educators, historians, and citizens collectively bear the duty to remember, analyze, and convey the lessons of the Holocaust. Reinhard illustrates that forgetting or ignoring such events allows the conditions for mass atrocity to persist. Vigilance, education, and moral reflection are essential tools for societies to resist the normalization of prejudice, the abuse of power, and the potential repetition of such horrors. In conclusion, Operation Reinhard's enduring impact extends beyond the atrocities themselves. Its legacy encompasses lessons in morality, technology, bureaucracy, ideology, memory, and justice. By examining how Reinhard combined organizational precision with genocidal intent, we gain insight into the conditions that allow systemic cruelty to flourish. By remembering, educating, and reflecting, humanity can honor the victims and ensure that the industrialized killing machinery of Reinhard serves not only as a historical record but also as a lasting warning against the dangers of dehumanization, blind obedience, and the misuse of knowledge and power. Continuing the reflection on Operation Reinhard, one of the most profound lessons is the importance of memory in shaping contemporary moral and political awareness. Reinhard is not merely a historical event. It is a cautionary tale about the fragility of human ethics under systemic pressure. Societies that forget or minimize such atrocities risk repeating the conditions that made them possible. Commemoration, archives, survivor testimonies, and public education serve as protective mechanisms, keeping alive the memory of victims while warning future generations of the consequences of hatred, indifference, and authoritarianism. The role of memorials and museums cannot be overstated. Physical sites of Reinhard, including Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec, have been transformed into spaces of reflection and education. These memorials preserve not only the memory of the victims but also evidence of the operational and technological processes that facilitated mass murder. Visitors encounter pathways, reconstructed camp layouts, and information about logistical operations, gaining insight into how industrialized killing was possible. By combining historical data with human stories, these sites emphasize the moral weight behind the technical details, teaching empathy alongside historical knowledge. Education about Reinhard also highlights the intersection of ideology, technology, and human behavior. Scholars and teachers examine how propaganda, social conditioning, and bureaucratic organization enabled ordinary individuals to participate in extraordinary atrocities. Lessons extend beyond history classes, informing discussions on ethics, civic responsibility, and the dangers of ideological extremism. Reinhard demonstrates that the mechanisms of genocide are not distant abstractions but can emerge in any society when dehumanization, blind obedience, and the misuse of technical expertise converge. Legal precedents established through the post-war trials of Reinhard personnel continue to influence international jurisprudence. The prosecution of figures like Franz Stangl and other SS officers demonstrated that crimes against humanity are prosecutable regardless of time, geography, or bureaucratic camouflage. International courts and tribunals have drawn upon these precedents to pursue justice in Rwanda, the former Yugoslavia, and other regions affected by mass atrocities. Reinhard thus serves as both a historical example and a foundational legal model, illustrating the long-term consequences of genocide and the global responsibility to hold perpetrators accountable. The ethical questions raised by Reinhard remain relevant today. How should societies respond when confronted with systemic dehumanization? What moral obligations do individuals have when functioning within bureaucracies that perpetuate harm? Reinhard provides a vivid case study for examining these questions. It illustrates that compliance, professional detachment, and adherence to authority can enable atrocities when moral reasoning is suppressed. At the same time, it shows that resistance, even in small acts, can preserve life, bear witness, and challenge the machinery of oppression. These lessons underscore the ongoing importance of cultivating ethical awareness in governance, education, and professional practice. Another enduring impact of Reinhard is the emphasis on the meticulous study of historical processes. Historians, archivists, and researchers have reconstructed transportation logs, camp layouts, gas chamber mechanics, and personnel hierarchies to understand not only the scale of killings but also the operational efficiency that enabled them. This detailed scholarship ensures that Reinhard is remembered with precision, countering denial and distortion. The depth of research serves as a model for studying mass atrocities more broadly, showing that understanding the mechanisms of systemic violence is essential for prevention. Public engagement with Reinhard, through literature, film, and survivor narratives, also reinforces collective memory. Stories of escape, resistance, and survival are essential in humanizing the victims and contextualizing the logistical and technological details of the operation. These narratives emphasize that history is not only about statistics and processes but about lived experiences. They foster empathy, moral reflection, and an understanding of the human cost of ideology and systemic cruelty. By blending operational knowledge with personal stories, Reinhard becomes both an intellectual and emotional lesson in human responsibility. The operation's relevance extends into contemporary discussions of genocide prevention. Scholars and policymakers examine Reinhard to identify early warning signs: bureaucratic dehumanization, ideological extremism, systematic propaganda, and technological applications detached from ethical oversight. By understanding these patterns, societies can implement measures to resist similar processes before they escalate. Reinhard thus serves not only as a historical case but as a practical tool for global human rights education and policy development. Finally, Reinhard's legacy underscores the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. While the operation demonstrates the extreme efficiency with which organized systems can execute atrocities, it also highlights acts of courage, survival, and moral choice. Escapees, partisans, and witnesses preserved crucial knowledge, challenged the system, and ensured that future generations could learn the truth. Reinhard teaches that even under overwhelming oppression, Human agency, ethical reflection, and resistance can persist, offering lessons of hope amid tragedy. In conclusion, the enduring impact of Operation Reinhard lies in its dual role as a historical record and a moral guide. By studying its logistical, technological, and ideological dimensions, we gain insight into the conditions that enable genocide. By preserving memory through trials, memorials, education, and scholarship, society honors the victims and equips future generations with the knowledge and ethical awareness necessary to prevent recurrence. Reinhard serves as a somber but essential reminder that vigilance, memory, and moral courage are the most powerful defenses against the machinery of systematic oppression and destruction.